My name is Thomas Blake, and in the summer of 2019, I took a job that I thought would change my life for the better. In a way, it did. Just not how I expected. I was 34, recently divorced, and burned out from over a decade working private security in Los Angeles. My doctor had been warning me for years about stress, and after the divorce I finally listened. I cashed out some savings and applied for a ranger position through the National Park Service. I wanted peace, solitude, a simpler life. The job offer came from a small, isolated park in northern Utah called Pine Reach. I'd never heard of it. The place barely existed online. Just a few vague mentions in backcountry hiking forums and a couple of grainy satellite photos. When I asked about it, the recruiter just said it was a quiet, underfunded district that needed a steady hand. That was fine with me. The station was a small wooden structure, about 20 miles off the nearest paved road, surrounded by towering pine forests and jagged limestone ridges. The kind of place where time seemed to slow down. The ranger I was replacing, a guy named McCready, didn't stick around to give me a proper handover. I arrived early in the afternoon. By dusk, his cabin was empty. The first week was uneventful. Peaceful, even. I patrolled the trails, restocked signs, cleared fallen branches, checked the campground, empty, the fire watchtower, creaky but functional, and the station radio always quiet. But the nights were strange. It wasn't the usual forest noises that kept me up. I've camped enough to know how animals move at night. No, this was different. The air would get still, too still. No wind, no crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then the feeling would come of pressure in my skull, like I was being watched. Studied? Around the fifth night, I woke to the sound of static. The station radio had turned itself on. I stumbled out of bed and walked into the main office, expecting a weather alert or garbled message from another ranger. But all I heard was this deep, warbling static, almost rhythmic, almost like breathing. I turned it off. Checked the wiring the next morning. Nothing wrong with it. 2 days later, I found the totem. I was hiking a rarely used trail near the southern boundary when I saw it. Something hanging from a tree, about 7 feet up. A strange wooden figure, carved from twisted branches and bound with what looked like old sinew or tendon. Human-shaped, but wrong. Its arms were too long. Its head was just a spiral of wood. I radioed it in. No response. When I returned the next day to take a photo, it was gone. Over the next week, I started noticing other signs. Deep gouges in tree bark. Strange prints in the mud near the stream elongated, almost hoof-like, but asymmetrical. A set of scratches on the supply shed door that hadn't been there before. Then came the dreams, always the same. I'm walking through the forest at night, drawn by the sound of a bell, a slow, solemn tolling that echoes through the trees. The forest changes around me. The trees twist, the moon vanishes, and then I see it. Not clearly, just a shape, tall, thin, antlers maybe, eyes like lanterns, watching me, and always just before I wake I hear a voice. You're not supposed to be here. I spent the rest of that sleepless night huddled in the watchtower, shotgun in lap, eyes fixed on the black expanse of trees that stretched into forever. Every creak of the wooden frame made my heart jump. Every gust of wind was a whisper too close. I don't remember dozing off, but when I blinked awake, The sun was rising, pale and indifferent over the forest like nothing had happened. I radioed dispatch again, repeating the story I'd told the night before, this time calmer, more collected. They'd promised to send backup, but warned me not to go searching alone. They didn't have to. I wasn't planning on leaving the tower until I saw another living soul, and even then, I wasn't so sure I'd believe they were real. Around noon, a Forest Service chopper buzzed in from the south, cutting a slow, cautious arc over the valley. When it touched down in the field near the ranger station, 3 figures disembarked. One of them I recognized. Ranger Eric Malone, mid-50s, all gravel and calluses. He'd trained half the rookies in our division and could smell a hoax before it was even hatched. He looked different today. He didn't speak right away, just stood there with his boots planted in the grass, squinting at the tree line like it owed him money. This where it happened? He finally asked, nodding toward the tower. His voice was low, serious. I nodded. About 200 yards north, right where trail 6 cuts behind the ridge. And you're sure you saw it, this figure? I didn't just see it, I said. I heard it, felt it. It was there, Eric. You know, I'm not the type to scare easy. He nodded once, grim. I believe you, he said, and those words scared me more than if he'd called me crazy. We spent the day combing the area with the other 2 guys from the chopper. One a tracker named Flynn, the other some quiet guy in plain clothes who never gave his name. While Malone and I checked the ridge, Flynn scanned the perimeter for prints or scat. The quiet guy took readings with a handheld Geiger counter. Not something you see often in forestry work. I watched the needle jump sporadically and pretended not to notice. Near sundown, we reached the spot where I'd first seen the figure. There was a small depression in the soil where something big had stood. Not quite a footprint, more like pressure from weight alone. No claws, no toes. Just sunken, compressed earth. Surrounding it were small burn marks in the undergrowth, as if the air around the thing had been hot. Flynn called us over to the riverbank, where the missing hiker had left his last radio ping. We found his pack torn at the seams, contents half scattered in the mud. His journal was still inside, damp but readable. The last entry was a single line, scribbled in jagged handwriting. There in the trees, they never blink. That night, the chopper took the quiet guy and Flynn back. Malone insisted on staying, said he didn't trust the radio anymore. We bunked in the tower. He brought a hunting rifle, a field notebook, and a 5th of wild turkey. What do you think it is? I asked, watching the last orange glow fade behind the trees. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the treetops like he was watching something only he could see. I don't know, he said finally, but I saw something like it once, back in '97, same forest, different ridge. We lost a fire crew up there, never found him. Just scorch marks and melted gear. He took a long drink and offered the bottle. I shook my head. You didn't report it? He looked at me then, and I mean really looked, like he was weighing something. We did, he said. But the report vanished. DC shut it down. Told us it was a lichen strike, but that crew didn't burn. They evaporated. There's something under this forest, kid. Something old. We were never supposed to wake it up. Before I could ask what he meant, the radio crackled. Not a voice, not static. A sound, low and rhythmic. Like chanting, like humming that didn't come from any human mouth. And beneath it, a whisper that barely brushed the edge of hearing. Still watching, Malone stood up slowly, the blood draining from his face. "It's using our frequency." He grabbed the rifle and stepped to the window, scanning the trees. Then he froze. North tree line. 400 yards. Movement. I looked. Nothing but darkness. But then I saw it. 2 pinpricks of pale light, eyes, unblinking, fixed on us. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, didn't waver, just hovered out there in the dark like twin moons, faint and dead and impossibly still. I raised the binoculars with shaking hands. Through the lens I could make out a shape, tall, gaunt, not quite human. Its body rippled subtly, like smoke under water. A blur of something trying to wear a shape that didn't fit. Malone's voice was barely a whisper beside me. Same damn eyes from 97. He grabbed the emergency flare gun from the wall and fired. The shot hissed into the night, flaring red over the trees. For one breathless second, the whole ridge lit up like a photograph. And we saw it clearly, standing between 2 trees, one hand braced against a trunk, long fingers spread like talons. Its skin was pale and stretched thin over bones that jutted at wrong angles. Its chest didn't rise and fall. Its mouth wasn't a mouth at all, just a black slit, vertical and twitching. But the eyes, God, the eyes, glowing like dull headlights, watching us. As the flare fizzled out, darkness crashed back in. We lost sight of it, but the forest reacted. It went silent, dead silent. Then the air changed, turned thick, humming with pressure, like before a tornado. Malone barked, "Lights out." We killed every lamp in the tower, plunging ourselves into darkness. He pulled me to the ground. If it thinks we're gone, it might back off. But then the radio turned itself on. No one touched it, no power, no transmission button pressed. Just a sudden whisper through the speaker. The same voice as before, distant and wet, like something speaking through a throat full of mud. "You've seen me now." Then the scream came, far below the tower. Human, desperate. A woman. "Help, please." Oh, God, please. I was already up, heart jackhammering in my ribs. Someone's out there. Malone grabbed my arm, hard. "No, that's not a woman. That's bait." "What?" "It mimics. It learns. That voice, that's Rhonda Lee, from the 97 crew. She's been dead 20 years. The scream came again. Louder this time. Closer. Malone shoved a flashlight into my hand and hissed, "Whatever happens, do not open that door." The next 10 minutes were pure hell. We sat with our backs to the wall, weapons loaded, barely breathing. Outside, the scream circled the tower. Sometimes it sounded like a woman, sometimes a child. Once, horribly, it sounded like my own voice shouting for help. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Then came the thud. Not on the ground. On the roof. Above us, ... we froze. Something was on the tower. I mouthed, "How did it get up there?" Malone's face was drenched in sweat. He didn't answer, just cocked the rifle and aimed upward. Boards creaked above us, then scratching, slow, deliberate. Nails dragging across wood. Then a thud on the balcony outside the front window. Something tall moved past the glass. A silhouette, broad-shouldered, head low, arms too long. It paused there, watching. Then came a sound I will never forget. A laugh? Low, imitative, broken, it was trying to sound human. Malone stood up, aimed the rifle at the window, and said in a flat voice, "Back off, you bastard." The figure tilted its head, curious. Then it whispered in my voice, "Please, help me. It's inside." That was enough. Malone fired. The window shattered. Glass exploded into the room. The figure vanished in an instant, not ducked or ran, just blinked out of existence. But as the echo of the gunshot faded, something new rose up from the forest. A chorus. Dozens, no, hundreds, of voices whispering in unison. A tide of tongues from the woods beyond. "You've seen use now." The pressure in the air intensified. The tower began to vibrate. Wood groaned, nails popped. Malone shoved a thick leather journal into my chest. "Take this. Get out. If the tower comes down, you run. Don't wait for me." "What?" "Go." Another blast of noise shook the tower. This time it wasn't voices. It was a horn, low, hollow, ancient. Something beneath us was awakening. I grabbed the journal and my gear, heart hammering so hard it drowned out everything else. Then I heard Malone yell something, and the floor buckled beneath me. The tower began to collapse, and I fell. I don't remember hitting the ground. I remember the fall, the tower breaking beneath me, the screaming wind, a sudden flash of trees spinning upward as I dropped into the blackness below. Then nothing. I came to hours later, sprawled at the base of the collapsed tower. My body screamed in pain, but nothing felt broken, just battered, bruised. Lucky, the forest was quiet, too quiet, and the tower, it was gone. A shattered mess of lumber and steel, torn apart like a toy dropped from the sky. Malone was nowhere, no body, no blood, just gone. I stumbled to my feet, half blind in the dawn light, clutching the leather-bound journal he'd shoved into my hands before it all went to hell. I didn't remember grabbing my bag, but it was slung over my shoulder, radio, flare gun, compass. My boots squelched in mud as I turned in a circle. Everything looked wrong. The trees leaned just slightly toward me, like they were listening, and the ground pulsed beneath my feet, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I needed to get out. I needed to run, but the woods wouldn't let me. I tried heading west, back toward the Ranger Road, toward civilization, but my compass spun wildly. No matter which direction I turned, it pointed east, toward the ravine, toward that cave. Something was drawing me there, dragging me. I fought it for hours, bushwhacking through underbrush, screaming for help, firing off flares until I had none left. But every time I checked the map, checked the sun, I was somehow closer to the ravine than before. I don't remember deciding to enter the cave, only standing inside it. The air was wet and wrong. The walls pulsed with veins of glowing fungus. The light was reddish purple, like a bruise on the world's skin. I followed the tunnel deeper. The walls closed in behind me. I could feel something under the rock, something ancient. Moving, I opened Malone's journal, desperate for answers. Inside were maps of the park, old ones drawn by hand, and a list of dates stretching back a century. Each one marked with a name. Most of them had been crossed out. Each entry had a number next to it. 72.3, 48.9, 11.0, 3.2, 0.1. The last one had no name. Just you, The final entry in the book read, "They don't live in the forest. The forest lives in them. The root below is their God, and it's waking up." I turned the page. It was a sketch, a crude one, but I recognized it, the creature, standing tall beneath a black tree with dozens of arms growing from it like vines. The root below is their God, and it's waking up. Beneath the tree's roots were bones, human bones, feeding it. Nestled in its trunk was a vertical slit, twitching like a mouth. Then I turned the last page, and there was a photograph, faded, curled with age. It showed the original ranger crew, maybe from the 1950s. 5 men and 1 woman, all in uniform, standing outside what looked like the same cave. The woman had her hand on the shoulder of a man I recognized. Malone, but he looked the same, exactly the same. He hadn't aged a day. I heard a sound then, a voice whispering from deep in the tunnel ahead. Not words, not exactly. It sounded like roots breaking stone. I kept walking, not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stop. The passage opened up into a vast chamber, bigger than a cathedral, its ceiling lost in blackness. And in the center stood the tree. It wasn't made of wood. It was bone and fungus and rot. Its roots pulsed like arteries. Its branches were filled with shapes. Some were animal, some were not. At its base I saw Malone. "Choose what?" I croaked. "Take the book. Take my place." The ground shook. The tree moaned. Roots writhed like worms. Something deep beneath the earth began to rise. I ran, back through the tunnels, up toward the surface, toward light, toward air. I don't know how I found my way, but somehow I did. I stumbled into the daylight, coughing and covered in black mud. The forest had returned to normal. Birds sang. A breeze stirred the leaves. The cave was gone. Just rock and moss and a sheer cliff face. I collapsed. 3 days later, I was found by a rescue crew. They said I'd been missing for 6 days. The fire lookout tower was declared destroyed in a storm. Malone was never found. I told them he ran into a bear attack, that he tried to save me. That's what they wanted to hear. But I kept the journal, and sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I hear something in the trees outside my window. Not footsteps, just roots, crawling across the floor of the world, looking for me. And in the dream, the tree is there, it's waiting, and one day I know I'll have to go back to take my place. Crawling across the floor of the world, looking for me. And in the dream, the tree is there, it's waiting, and one day I know I'll have to go back to take my place. My duties were basic trail maintenance, assisting lost hikers, checking permits, and occasionally helping the geologists still monitoring the slow heartbeat of the volcano. It was quiet work, and for someone like me, who'd spent the last 10 years trying to escape the noise of modern life, it was ideal. But something happened that summer, something buried, deep beneath the ash and moss and decades of silence, and I haven't been the same since. It started with a call from a research team monitoring geothermal activity in the northeast quadrant of the restricted zone. The area was officially off limits to the public, still considered unstable, full of sinkholes, gas vents, and soft ground. The geologists had gone radio silent after checking in at 6:14 a.m. on July 5th. I was sent out with a partner, Cole Drury, to investigate. We were given GPS coordinates and an order to report back by sundown. The drive up to the trailhead was uneventful. Quiet forest roads, morning mist hanging between the trunks like wet cobwebs. We parked just past a washout where the road gave way to broken pavement and moss. From there, we hiked the rest. I remember Cole cracking a joke about the sulfur in the air, said it reminded him of rotten eggs in Catholic school. I laughed. At the time, we were still normal, still clean. The hike took us through burned-out patches of forest and into older growth. The trees here twisted, bark blackened but alive. The underbrush was sparse, and the further we went, the quieter the forest became. Birds disappeared. Even the wind seemed hesitant. That kind of silence sticks with you, the oppressive kind. You don't forget it. When we reached the coordinates, the camp was still there. 2 tents, half-zipped. Equipment laid out neatly. No sign of a struggle. No blood. Just empty. We called out. Waited. Checked the perimeter. Nothing. Then Cole noticed something. The soil between the tents had sunken slightly, a shallow depression, like the ground had inhaled. He poked at it with a trekking pole, and the earth crumbled in, revealing a narrow hole, perfectly round, maybe 2 feet across, deep enough that our flashlights couldn't find the bottom. No scorch marks, no tools, no signs the team had dug it themselves. Something about it felt wrong. Wrong in a way I can't describe. Like it shouldn't have been there. Like it didn't belong to the world we knew. Cole said we should radio it in. I agreed. That's when the static started. Our radios had full battery top of the line, but every time we tried to transmit, we got static. Then something beneath it, not a voice, more like a pulse. A low, rhythmic thudding, faint, wet. Cole tried again. Then we heard the scream, not through the radio, from the forest, close. It wasn't human. I don't care what anyone says. I know what people sound like in pain. I've worked search and rescue. I've heard people with broken legs, punctured lungs, even one poor bastard who fell on his own axe. But this was different. It was a scream made by something that had learned how to sound human, but hadn't quite nailed it. Like a throat full of gravel and fluid, trying to imitate anguish. Cole took a step back. I took out my sidearm. We scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Then came the second sound. Not a scream this time. Not quite. It was whispering from the hole. I leaned in. Flashlight gripped tight. And I swear to God, I heard my name. Not shouted, not echoed. Spoken. Daniel. My full name. My real name. Not Dan. Not Kessler. Daniel. No one out there should have known that we'd backed away, fast, packed nothing, left everything. We made it back to the station an hour after dark. We didn't talk the whole way. When we did, it was to say we hadn't found the team, that the zone was unstable, that there were signs of a sinkhole, that the forest was shifting. None of it was true. The next morning, a military convoy rolled up the logging road. Not U.S. Forest Service, not FEMA, no insignia. Just black trucks and stone-faced men in uniforms that didn't match anything I'd ever seen. They sealed the quadrant, hauled out the research gear, ordered everyone to keep clear. The official report said the geologists fell into a collapsed lava tube. No remains were found. No further questions were answered. Cole resigned a week later. I lasted another month. But sometimes, even now, I'll hear it again. When I'm alone, when the world's gone still, I'll hear the whisper like it's drifting up through the floorboards, through the earth. Daniel, something's still alive down there, still waiting, and I think it knows we're listening. My name's Casey Tolland, and 6 months ago I left my entire life behind. I had my reasons. A failed engagement, a dead-end job in the city, and a creeping sense that I was wasting my life watching the years stack up like paperwork on my desk. So when I saw the ad for a seasonal ranger position in the North Cascades, something about it pulled at me. Isolation preferred, solo post. Fire lookout tower needs manning for late summer season. Must be comfortable, alone in deep wilderness. Most people would have scrolled past it, but to me it sounded like salvation. The North Cascades are no joke. Rugged, towering peaks and thick forests that seem to breathe when the wind picks up. The tower I was assigned to Blanchard Ridge Lookout hadn't been used in over a decade. The district office said budget cuts had kept it dormant, but they wanted it manned again this season due to increased wildfire risk. The pay was nothing special, but it came with a solar-powered radio, rations, a cot, and a view from 8,000 feet above sea level. All I had to do was keep watch and be alone. The hike-in took most of a day. The trail was overgrown and barely marked. I saw no one. The tower itself sat perched on a rocky outcrop, looking out over endless pine forests and craggy ridgelines. It creaked like an old ship in the wind, but it was solid. Inside, dust covered everything, but there was a strange sense of calm. The first few days were blissfully uneventful. I'd wake with the sun, scan the horizon with the provided binoculars, and log my observations on an old clipboard. I'd hike a bit, read paperbacks I'd brought, or just sit and watch clouds roll over the valley below. It was the kind of silence that made you realize how loud the world had been. I started sleeping better. My thoughts felt clearer. But then the forest changed. It started with the trees. Not the color or shape, something subtler. A pattern. I'd noticed certain pines along the southern ridge had markings on their bark. Vertical slashes, evenly spaced. At first I figured it was claw marks, bears maybe, but they were too uniform, almost measured. I mentioned it in my nightly log over the radio, but no one replied. That wasn't unusual. The ranger office only checked in once a week. The next day I found another tree with the same markings. Then two more, all of them within a mile of the tower. And beneath one, half buried in moss, I found a ring of stones arranged deliberately. 5 of them, each with the same symbol carved into its surface. A crude circle with a single vertical line through it. I didn't touch it. That night, the woods felt too quiet. No wind, no owls, no rustling. Just a blanket of silence, so thick I could hear my own pulse. Around 2 a.m. I woke up with the uncheckable feeling I was being watched. I looked out the window, saw nothing, but when I stepped outside with my flashlight, the beam caught something in the tree line. Eyes, too high up for a deer, too far apart for a cougar, and then they blinked. The eyes blinked, and then they were gone. No sound. No rustling of branches. Just gone. I stood there for a long time, the cold night air biting through my flannel shirt, flashlight shaking in my grip. I told myself it was an animal. Had to be a bear, maybe. Or a moose. Something with eyes that reflected light. But something didn't sit right. Those eyes had been too steady. Like they weren't surprised by me, like they expected me. I stayed inside the rest of the night, radio clutched in my lap, static hissing like distant whispers. I didn't sleep. The next morning I made a decision. I had to check it out. Not just for my sanity, but because I couldn't shake the idea that whatever it was, it hadn't been passing through. It was lingering. I hiked to the tree line where I'd seen the eyes. The ground there was oddly clear, like something large had been pacing. The pine needles were disturbed, but no footprints, just impressions. Circular depressions in the soil, almost like hooves, but too wide, too deep. I pushed further in. I followed the trees with the markings deeper into the ridge's southern face. That's when I found the second ring of stones, larger this time, and older. Lichen covered them, but I could still make out the carvings. The same symbol. A circle with a vertical line through the center. This one had something in the middle. Bones. Animal bones arranged in a spiral. Carefully, ritualistically. I backed away, every hair on my arms standing up. I'd worked enough with park services in the past to know what scat, tracks, and kills looked like. This wasn't an animal kill. This was something else. I returned to the tower and tried the radio again. Tower 9 to base, over. This is Casey Tolland, Blanchard Ridge. I need someone to check in. Possible illegal activity. Ritualistic signs. Animal remains. Please respond. Nothing. The sun began to dip behind the mountains. The shadows crawled across the valley like spilled ink. And then the tower started to creak. Not just from the wind, this was different. Sharp, sudden, like weight, like footsteps. I went quiet, held my breath. 1, 2, 3 steps on the outer stairs. I stepped backward, flashlight off, back pressed to the inside wall. I could hear it breathing now, slow, wet, and deep. Then something scratched against the outer wall. Long, slow, deliberate strokes like claws or knives. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night either. By morning, whatever it was had gone. I checked the stairs. No prints, no sign of claw marks. But on the door, smeared in sap or blood, I couldn't tell, was that same symbol again. A circle with a line. And underneath, written in jagged block letters that hadn't been there the night before, "You should not be here." I didn't leave the tower for 2 days after finding that message. I kept the doors locked, moved my cot to the far corner, slept during the day in short, broken intervals, and kept watch at night. I heard it again, whatever it was, never close enough to see, but always close enough to hear. The dragging steps on the gravel path, the breath, the scrape of nails on wood. And then there was the whispering. I thought it was the wind at first, but the more I listened, the more I realized it was language. Something guttural and wet, like it was being forced through a mouth that wasn't made to speak. On the third morning, I finally snapped. I couldn't just wait to die up here, not with that thing watching me. So I packed my bag, grabbed my revolver, the same one every ranger was issued, but never expected to use, and set out toward the southern ridge. toward the second circle of stones. I had to find out what it was, why it was there, and more importantly, why it hadn't killed me yet. I made it to the second ring by midday. The bones were gone. The stones had been rearranged, this time into a spiral that led downward into a shallow sinkhole I hadn't noticed before. There were stairs carved into the rock, crude, uneven, slick with moss and decay. My flashlight flickered as I descended. The air changed immediately. Wet, thick, like I was breathing something alive. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel widened into a cavern. There were more symbols carved into the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. The same circle and line motif, but more complex now, twisting into branches, roots, eyes, and in the center of the chamber stood something ancient. It wasn't a statue. It was alive, but barely. Huge, motionless, covered in bark and bone and moss, like it had been growing out of the earth for centuries. A forest god that time had tried to forget. Its head was crowned with twisted antlers. Its body slumped like a withered tree, and though its eyes were closed, I knew it knew I was there. All around it were piles of offerings, bones, old ranger uniforms, broken radios, teeth, pieces of stone etched with runes I didn't recognize. I felt something pulling at me, not physically, but mentally, like my thoughts weren't entirely mine anymore, like it was whispering directly into my brain. Return, obey, replace. Then its eyes opened, yellow, ancient, the same ones I'd seen blinking from the trees that first night. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I got out, just that I was back at the tower by nightfall, my flashlight dead, my hands bleeding from scraping against rock and thorns. I locked the door and waited for the sun. When daylight finally came, I used the emergency set phone hidden in the tower's supply chest, the one they tell you is only for worst-case scenarios. They didn't ask questions, just told me someone would be there by noon. When the truck arrived, it wasn't the Forest Service. It was men in unmarked uniforms. They didn't wear badges, didn't carry radios, just guns and clipboards. They didn't even look surprised when I told them what I saw. One of them, a man with a clean-shaven head and eyes that never blinked, asked me just one question. "Did it speak to you?" I lied, said no. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew I wouldn't be allowed to leave if I told the truth. They escorted me out, told me my contract was terminated for psychological instability, and warned me not to discuss what I saw for the safety of the public. The next day, Tower 9 was burned to the ground in a controlled fire. No mention in the news, no record of my employment, no investigation, but I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there, beneath the ridge, watching, waiting. Sometimes I hear it in my dreams, that voice dry and rotted, but patient, promising that it will return, that we were never meant to forget it, and now we won't. My name is Martin Holly, and up until last fall, I worked as a geologist with the Bureau of Land Management. I specialized in cave systems mapping, studying, and occasionally guiding survey teams through some of the lesser-known subterranean stretches of the American West. Most of my work was technical, dry even. Long hours of data collection, rock analysis, and plotting ancient fault lines. But the cave I found last October, if you can even call it that, was different. I was out in Nevada, just north of the Monitor Range, a few miles off Highway 50. The BLM had tasked me with investigating reports of sinkholes cropping up on remote parcels of land slated for development. Nothing unusual. Just another long, dusty solo trip through empty terrain. I'd parked my government-issued Jeep near a crumbling cattle fence and hiked out into the hills, topographical maps in hand, heading for a depression that had caught my eye on a recent satellite scan. The land out there is harsh, sharp ridges of volcanic rock, bristlecone pine scattered like forgotten centuries, and silence so absolute it presses against your eardrums. I didn't find a sinkhole. I found an opening in the earth that shouldn't have been there, a tear in the landscape hidden between weathered rock formations, maybe 5 feet wide, but deep, so deep that even with my high-lumen headlamp, I couldn't see the bottom. What struck me first was the smell, not just the expected mustiness of subterranean air, but something wrong, like old blood soaked into dry stone. It clung to my nostrils, metallic and thick. Normally I would have flagged the location, recorded coordinates, and moved on. But something about this place gnawed at my instincts. The edges of the hole were smooth, not jagged, worn down, almost polished. That's not how erosion works, not out here, not like that. And then I noticed the carvings, just below the rim, etched into the stone in a series of concentric circles, were symbols, old, weathered, unfamiliar. They didn't look like petroglyphs, at least, not the kind used by the indigenous peoples of the area. These were geometric, interlocking, and deeply etched, as if they'd been burned into the stone rather than chiseled. I should have left. Instead, I set up my rope and harness. I told myself it was for documentation, just a quick descent, a peek inside. I'd done it 100 times before. But looking back, it wasn't curiosity that pulled me into that hole. It was something else, something that wanted me to enter. The descent was immediate and steep, the kind of drop that doesn't widen, it narrows. After the first 15 feet, the rock walls began to curve inward, like a throat swallowing me whole. The beam of my headlamp barely touched the sides now, the darkness pressing tighter than any cave I'd ever explored. At about 40 feet down, my boot found a ledge. I adjusted my harness, steadied myself, and unhooked. The silence here wasn't natural. It was too complete. Even my breath seemed dampened, like the air didn't want to carry sound. That's when I noticed the walls. They weren't stone. Not anymore. They had a texture organic, almost ribbed, slightly wet to the touch. My glove came back with a dark smear that didn't look like dirt or mold, more like ichor. There was a smell again, stronger now, fleshy, coppery, rotting and alive at the same time. I should have climbed back up. Instead, I pushed forward into a tunnel that sloped gradually downward. The carvings continued along the walls, more frequent now, more intricate. Spirals and lines that seemed to twist if you stared too long. Words without sound, thoughts that weren't mine. Disjointed, backwards, wrong. I couldn't make sense of them at first, only that they repeated, echoed, grew louder the deeper I went. I passed through a narrow breach into a wider chamber, and that's when I saw them, figures, mummified, almost dozens of them, curled into the alcoves lining the walls, fused into the stone. Not buried, not laid to rest. absorbed, their faces stretched in silent agony, mouths frozen mid-scream, eyes wide and empty. Their skin was tight and waxy, pulled back against bone, and many of them wore clothing that didn't match. I saw modern boots, a utility belt, a backpack with a Bureau of Land Management patch almost identical to mine. I took a step back, and the ground moved beneath me. Not like a tremor, not like rock giving way. No, this was deliberate, a pulse, like something beneath the floor was breathing. That's when the whispering stopped, and a new sound started, a dragging, wet shuffle from the tunnel behind me. Slow at first, but steady, growing closer. Something was coming. I backed away, light shaking in my hands. My radio crackled to life for a second, just a hiss, like someone drawing a breath right against the mic, and then silence again. The thing that emerged from the tunnel wasn't entirely visible, just shapes limbs that bent wrong, a mouth too wide, and eyes like the ones I'd seen carved into the walls, almond-shaped, black as pitch, and ancient. It didn't walk. It flowed like it had no bones. I ran, I dropped gear, left my rope. I just ran through those winding, flesh-lined halls until I saw the faint glow of daylight up above. But the cave didn't want to let me go. The walls pulsed as I climbed, narrowing, trembling, trying to close in. My harness snagged, tore, I ripped myself free and scrambled up barehanded, fingernails snapping against the rock, legs screaming. I don't remember exactly how I got out. I just remember the light hitting my face and the feeling of something just behind me. And then silence, real silence, sunlight, the sound of wind again. When I stumbled back to the Jeep, my hands were shredded, my face streaked with blood. I drove straight to the nearest ranger outpost, but I didn't tell them what I saw. Just said I slipped into a cave and took a fall. They bought it. Mostly. One ranger gave me a weird look, though. A knowing one, like maybe I wasn't the first. Later that week, I tried to return with a team. I had to show them. But the cave entrance? Gone. Not just buried, erased. The rock had sealed over, smooth as if it had never been disturbed. I filed my report, marked the site unstable, a potential landslide zone. I couldn't tell them the truth. Hell, I could barely say it out loud. But I haven't stopped dreaming about it, because some nights I wake up hearing those whispers again, and sometimes when I walk too close to stone, I swear I feel it breathe. I transferred to Alpine Ridge after the incident in Trinity Bluff. My therapist said I needed a fresh start. Smaller town, slower pace, less stress. That was the idea, anyway. Alpine Ridge barely registers on most maps. Population 2,308. The kind of place where Main Street has a diner, a hardware store, and a post office all in one building. My first day on the force, the chief, an old-timer named Griggs, handed me the keys to a beat-up cruiser and a stapled packet of shift logs. I was expecting a welcome speech, maybe a quick rundown of the usual town trouble. Instead, he handed me a laminated card. No introduction. Just slid it across the desk like it weighed 100 pounds. Night shifts start tonight, he said, avoiding my eyes. You'll be working near the old chapel. Don't lose this. I looked at the card. 7 rules, short, simple. But they hit me with the same cold weight I'd felt. once before reading a similar list in another small town. The font was old school, the kind you'd see on typewriters, and the edges of the card were worn from years of use. Rules for patrolling the Bell Tower Chapel, Alpine Ridge PD. 1. You must begin your patrol no later than 11:57 p.m. If you're late, do not enter the zone. Go directly to the station. 2. Never shine your flashlight on the chapel windows. If you think you see someone inside, you don't. 3. If you hear the bell ring between midnight and 3 a.m., count the chimes. If it rings once, you're fine. If it rings twice, stop walking and hold your breath until the sound fades. If it rings 3 times, drop to the ground and cover your ears. If it rings 4 or more times, start running. Do not look back. 4. You may encounter another officer on foot. If their badge number begins with A, do not speak to them. 5. At 2:45 a.m., a woman in white may approach your cruiser. She will knock and ask for help. Lock your doors. Do not respond. 6. You are required to leave the patrol zone by exactly 3:03 a.m. Failure to do so will result in administrative reassignment. 7. Do not report anything unusual. Chief Griggs already knows. I looked up at the chief. Is this a joke? He didn't smile. It's not a joke, kid. This town's had that chapel since 1834. We don't ring the bell anymore. Not with ropes, anyway. I should have walked out right then. Told him no thanks, I'd take my chances back in Trinity Bluff. But instead, like an idiot chasing closure, I nodded, took the keys, and drove toward the chapel just before midnight. It was worse than I imagined. The chapel stood at the edge of town, past a patch of woods that the locals called Bell Hollow. It looked abandoned, paint peeling, windows cracked, the tower crooked like a leaning tooth. But the moment I stepped into the patrol zone, a heaviness settled over me, the kind that sinks into your chest like wet sand. 11:57 p.m. I parked the cruiser in the designated lot, the asphalt overgrown with moss and weeds, and started my rounds. I kept my flashlight low, careful not to point it at the building. For the first half hour, nothing happened. Just a sound of crickets and the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. Then, at exactly 12:32, I heard it. A single hollow chime. The bell. It sounded like it came from miles away, and yet it echoed all around me, inside my chest, inside my teeth. But I remembered the rule. 1 chime was fine. I kept walking. 20 minutes later, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A shape at the chapel window, tall, motionless. I turned my head, not the light. Nothing there, just glass and rot. But I swear to God, when I turned away, I saw a second shadow next to mine, and then 2 chimes. My heart leapt. I froze, held my breath. The air turned ice cold. The cicadas went dead silent. The moonlight dimmed as if something passed in front of it, something massive. I counted the seconds in my head until the sound faded. When the bell stopped, the warmth returned all at once. The bugs resumed their chorus, and I breathed. Still with me? I didn't move for a while after those 2 chimes faded, just stood there in the silence, listening to the blood pounding in my ears. Every nerve in my body was alert, tuned to something ancient and wrong in the air. It felt like the forest around the chapel was watching me. I checked my watch, 12:58 a.m. Still over 2 hours to go. I kept walking the perimeter, my flashlight low. The trees creaked with the wind, but the wind wasn't cold. It was the kind of stillness that only breaks when something's about to go wrong. I passed the old graveyard behind the chapel, rows of crooked headstones stretching like bones pushing up through the earth. That's when I heard footsteps. They weren't mine. They came from the far side of the chapel, steady, heavy boots crunching gravel. Another officer? Maybe Griggs sent backup? I stepped toward the corner of the building, and just as I rounded it, there he was. A tall man in a patrol uniform, same colors, same patches. I almost called out to him, but something stopped me. His back was to me, but his posture was off. Too still. His head cocked slightly, like he was listening for something. I looked down at his chest. His badge glinted in the moonlight. A 12. My stomach turned. Rule 4. You may encounter another officer on foot. If their badge number begins with A, do not speak to them. I took one step back. A twig snapped beneath my boot. The figure froze. He didn't turn around, not right away. His shoulders rose slightly, and then his neck twisted in a way that no neck should move, like a doll being rotated on a string. His head turned almost too far, just enough to show the corner of a smile stretched across skin, too pale to be human. And then, suddenly, he was gone, not walking away, not running, just gone like the fog swallowed him whole. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the chapel. I didn't dare call it in. 1:37 a.m. I made my way back toward the cruiser, sticking to the trail. My boots felt heavier with each step, like the earth didn't want me leaving. I kept thinking about that twisted smile, and the way it had looked pleased to see me. When I reached the cruiser, I sat inside, doors locked, engine off. I tried not to think, just watched the fog creep past the windows like it was breathing. 2:12 a.m. That's when the woman came. At first I thought she was part of the fog, just a shape in the mist, flowing like fabric on water. But then she solidified. White dress, long black hair, no shoes. She walked barefoot across the pavement like it wasn't cold at all. She stopped beside the driver's side window and knocked. Just once, a single gentle tap that sent a jolt down my spine. I didn't move. Rule 5. At 2:45 a.m., a woman in white may approach your cruiser. She will knock and ask for help. Lock your doors. Do not respond. But this was early, almost half an hour too early. She knocked again, and this time she whispered, "Please, I need help." I turned my head ever so slightly, just enough to see her in my peripheral vision. She was smiling. Her lips didn't move, but her voice was still coming. "Help me, officer. I'm lost." I gripped the steering wheel harder, trying to block her out. My eyes stayed straight ahead. Her hand slid down the window with a long, slow squeal of skin on glass. I could hear her nails now, tapping dash, tap, dash, tap, dash, tap, dash, faster and faster, like she was drumming along to some rhythm I couldn't hear. Let me in. She was behind the cruiser now, then beside the passenger window, then the windshield. Every time I blinked, she moved. Finally, she pressed her face to the glass. Her smile was impossibly wide. Her eyes black with something crawling just behind them locked on mine. I shut my eyes. And then, just like that, she was gone. No sound, no footsteps. The air felt lighter, 246 mm. The rest of the time I stayed put. The fog thinned. The chapel stood quiet. No bells, no more visitors. 3:03 a.m. came. I left the zone exactly on time, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. When I pulled back into the station, Griggs was there again, waiting. He didn't say a word, just nodded toward the desk where a cup of coffee steamed like he'd made it 5 minutes ago. "You've got one more night," he said, and then he added, almost too quietly to hear, "They know you now." By the third night, I was different. Something about me had shifted, like I'd stepped sideways through a door that no one else could see, and left something of myself behind. Griggs didn't meet me when I came in. His desk was empty, lights low. The only thing waiting was the folded paper on the locker room bench. Same yellowed edges, same blocky handwriting. Except this time there was a new rule. Rule 7. If the bells ring 4 times, drive away and do not return. Not even to the station. Do not answer your phone. Do not look back. I stared at it for a long time. 4 chimes. It was the first rule that didn't hint at survival, that hinted at escape. The station phone rang once while I was gearing up. I didn't answer. By 11:59 p.m., I was back in the cruiser, parked just outside the forest entrance that led to the chapel. The fog was already thick, heavier than the previous nights. It clung to the trees like cobwebs, dense enough to feel. Midnight struck. I started the car and drove toward the chapel, the headlights barely cutting through the white haze. The road wound tighter tonight. More bends than I remembered. More shadows between the trees. 1:11 a.m., that's when I heard the radio click on by itself. Static. Then, Daniel. Not my name. I'm not Daniel. But it said it again. "Daniel, please. Come in, it's urgent." The voice was familiar, the chief from my academy days. But I knew he was dead. Died 3 years back, cancer. I reached for the dial, but before I could switch it off, it laughed, not the voice, the radio, a dry, static-filled cackle that sounded like it came from behind my eyes. I yanked the volume knob. Silence. I passed the gates into the chapel clearing. Gravel crackled under the tires. The tower loomed above me, cloaked in fog so thick it looked like it was floating. The cruiser idled as I sat there, staring at it. 1:33 a.m. Still no bells. Still no visitors. Until the knock came from inside the car. I jumped so hard I hit the roof with my head. I twisted around. The back seat was empty. I turned slowly back to the windshield. There was a man standing just beyond the headlights, half his face torn away. A badge on his chest read A03. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, smiling, one hand casually resting on a severed stop sign like a cane. I blinked. He was gone. 2:06 a.m. The fog started to rise, this time curling up from the earth instead of drifting down from the trees. It spilled up from cracks in the gravel like something was breathing beneath the ground. And then the bells rang. Once I held my breath. Twice I gripped the wheel. 3 times. The trees shuddered, the cruiser vibrated slightly, and then the 4th chime. It didn't echo like the others. This one sounded wrong, cracked, like the bell tower itself was fracturing. I didn't wait. I floored the gas. The cruiser roared forward down the gravel road, skidding around the first turn as the fog screamed. I swear to God, the air itself screamed. Not wind, not some animal. Voices, dozens of them. They were in the trees, in the dirt, in my head shouting, laughing, crying, whispering things I'll never repeat. The rear-view mirror showed the tower behind me until it didn't. Because in one blink, the tower was closer. A second blink. It was on the road behind me, like it had uprooted and was chasing me down the hill. But I never looked back, not fully. I kept my eyes forward and floored the accelerator harder than I ever had in my life. The fog changed colors. It bled like red, then yellow, then black. I didn't know black could be a color of light, but it was. It shimmered and pulsed and threatened to swallow the headlights whole. My phone buzzed. Over and over. I didn't answer. The bell tolled again. 5. I knew what the rules said. If it rings 4 times, leave. But it had rung 5. What did that mean? I kept driving. At the edge of the forest, the fog vanished all at once, like a curtain being dropped. The cruiser skidded onto paved road. The radio sparked back to life. Cop it. Can anyone hear this? Officer, come in. I slammed the radio off and didn't stop driving until I saw the glow of the town below. I never made it to the station. I didn't want to know if it followed me. Instead, I drove to the next county, straight to the sheriff's department. I turned in my badge. Didn't give a reason. Didn't look back. They thought I'd cracked. Said I burned out. Maybe I did. But I'm alive, and I still have the paper, the rules. All 7 of them. Sometimes, late at night, I hear bells in the distance, even though I'm nowhere near a church. And when I do, I lock my doors, stay in my car, and keep my head down, because some rules aren't meant to be broken. My name is Officer Grant Mallory, and I serve in the quiet mountain town of Black Pines, nestled up against the edge of the National Forest. Population maybe 2,100, if you count the summer cabin folks. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where busted tail light is the most action we usually see. Or at least it used to be. It started with the little things. Missing pets. Lights seen deep in the forest where no one should be. Strange sounds on the wind that no one wanted to talk about in daylight. But around here, people are used to keeping their heads down. We mind our business. Until we can't. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from the dispatcher just after 9 p.m. A woman named Cassandra Brooks, panicked, whispering that someone was walking around her property just outside town, right on the tree line. Said she'd seen him twice, but when her husband stepped outside with the shotgun, the man vanished into the trees. Nothing too strange. We get drunks stumbling through yards now and then. I drove out there, did a perimeter sweep, found nothing. But the woods, they felt off. Still, in a way that presses against your ears, makes your heart beat the loudest thing you hear. I chalked it up to nerves, gave them a patrol schedule to ease their minds, and went on my way, but then the Brookses went silent. No calls, no sightings, their mail piled up. On the third day I drove back out. The front door was open. Inside the house was untouched, no signs of struggle, no blood. Food was half-eaten on the table, keys in the bowl by the door. The whole place just paused, like they'd stepped out for a second and never came back. I filed a missing persons report, but something didn't sit right with me. That night I parked at the edge of their property, watching the forest. No lights, no sounds, just me and the dark. Around 2 a.m. I heard something, a crack of a branch, a soft thump. I got out of the cruiser, hand on my holster, and stepped toward the tree line. Shined my flashlight between the trunks. That's when I saw him. A man, at least. That's what I thought. He was standing dead still between two trees, half-shadowed like he didn't belong to the world around him. He was tall, thin, too thin, limbs slightly too long. I only saw his face for a second before he stepped backward, melting into the woods like fog in the darkness. I shouted, drew my weapon, but I didn't give chase. I don't know why, maybe instinct, maybe fear. The next morning I went to the chief, told him everything. He didn't say much, just stared at me for a long time, jaw clenched, before finally muttering, "It's happening again." "What is?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out an old file, dusty, yellowed with time. Inside, photos, reports, newspaper clippings, all from 1977. 2 officers missing, 6 locals gone, all within 3 months. Every case closed the same way, inconclusive, presumed dead. All had one thing in common, sightings of someone standing still in the woods, watching. "You were a kid in 77, he said quietly. "You don't remember how bad it got. But it's starting again." I read through every report that night. The details varied. Some heard whispering. Some saw figures outside their windows. Others just vanished. But one thing remained the same. It started with the forest watching. Then it moved closer. That night I didn't sleep. A few days later, a kid went missing. David Miller, 10 years old, last seen riding his bike on the trail behind his house. No sign of him since. We found the bike snapped in two like it had been twisted. Not broken twisted. No prints, no blood. Just a bike and the silence. I started pulling double shifts. I patrolled deep into the woods, ignored the warnings. I had to know what was happening. The deeper I went, the more it felt like something was shifting in that forest. The trees got thicker, the paths narrower. My radio would crackle, even with full signal. Sometimes I'd hear static that almost sounded like breathing. One night I found a cabin deep in the trees, old, rotted out, not on any map. Inside were symbols carved into the walls, into bones scattered across the floor, deer skulls, bird skeletons, and human teeth. That's when I knew this wasn't just folklore. Something was living in that forest, something old, something that waits. Last night I got a call from Cassandra Brooks' number, static, then whispering, then a child's voice. "Officer Mallory, it's in the trees now. I haven't told the chief yet, because I know what comes next. And if it's happening again, I need to be ready. This town is my home, and I'm not leaving it to the thing that's hunting us, even if it means I vanish too." I slept maybe 3 hours that night. Dreams of tall shadows, and flickering red eyes chased me through fevered sleep. When I woke, the light outside was gray and sickly, and the bird song that usually greeted the morning in black pines was absent. By noon, I was back at the station, running coffee through my system like it could wash away the feeling of dread. Felix was already there, pale and twitchy, flipping through old case files at his desk. He didn't look up when I walked in. "You see that thing too?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Last night, out by Hollow Bend, something moved like it wasn't meant to be seen, and when I pointed my spotlight at it," he trailed off. "It didn't have a face, Amos, just skin, like wax melted wrong." I didn't know what to say. The logical part of my brain wanted to scream hallucination, fatigue, imagination. But the part of me that had been out there in the woods knew better. I spent the rest of the day diving into the case files from 1979, when the disappearances had first been reported near those woods. 6 people, all vanished within a 10-mile radius of that same broken fire tower. The only clue ever found was a bundle of their clothes tied with a strip of old fabric like a gift. Someone had said. The original investigator was Sheriff William Duval. He'd retired in 1981, left town a year later. I found his contact info buried in a personnel folder. California now. I called. He answered on the second ring. "Sheriff Duval? My name's Amos Wayne. I'm with the Messino Police Department. I'm working a case that might be connected to your investigation in '79. There was silence. Then, in a cracked voice, "It's still out there, isn't it?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. "You found the fire tower, didn't you?" he said. I swallowed hard. "Yeah," he sighed. "It watches from that place. That tower's older than the mine. Hell, older than the town. Built by the settlers before they vanished, before it started showing up." "What is it?" I asked. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "I don't know. But it feeds on fear, on memory. It wears the faces of the ones you've lost, tries to lure you in, get you to come willingly. That's how it takes you." The phone crackled. "If it's back, you need to seal the tower. Close it off. Burn it if you have to, but don't go back. Not alone." I thanked him and hung up. Then I looked at Felix. He'd heard the whole thing. "You still have the keys to the evidence locker?" I asked. He nodded. "Get me some road flares and a can of gasoline." We waited until dusk. The forest swallowed us whole as we drove back down the logging road. The tower came into view just as the sun dipped behind the hills. The silhouette of it, skeletal and wrong against the sky, made my stomach turn. We didn't speak as we climbed. I carried the gas can. Felix took the flares. At the top, everything was just as I'd left it, except the mannequin was gone. Or maybe it had never been real to begin with. Just something wearing my daughter's face. I splashed the gas on the floorboards, over the walls, across the rusted railings. Felix struck the flare and hesitated. "You sure about this?" "No," I said, "but we can't let it keep whispering to people. Can't let it get stronger." He dropped the flare. The fire caught instantly. Smoke poured out from the cracks in the walls, orange light flickering against the trees like some ancient beacon. And then we heard it, a scream low and long and not human. It didn't come from the tower, but from somewhere deep in the woods, followed by a second and a third. Different voices, different tones, all crying out in unison. The tower groaned as flames devoured it. Something inside thrashed, pounding against the walls. The whole structure shook like it was trying to stand up and flee. We ran. By the time we reached the patrol car, the tower was a pillar of fire against the night, and the woods had gone still. Utterly, impossibly still. We didn't talk about it much after that. No one in town asked what we'd been doing up there. Maybe they didn't want to know. But the dreams stopped. The disappearances stopped. And the woods, while still eerie, still heavy felt. Emptier, like something had left. Felix quit the force 6 months later. Said he was moving to Montana to work construction. I wished him well, and we didn't stay in touch. Me? I'm still here, still on the force, still watching, because I know these kinds of things don't die easy. And whatever watched from that tower, it had been here a long, long time. I only hope it doesn't come back. But if it does, I'll be ready. When I took the transfer to Cold Hollow, I thought I was getting a slower pace. After 15 years working patrol in bigger cities, the idea of a quiet town nestled between dense woods and mist-covered hills sounded like retirement with a badge. Chief Brody didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. He just handed me a faded folder and said, "You'll be running the North Sector. Night shift. We'll talk more after your first week." The folder wasn't thick. A map of the sector, a handful of missing persons reports, most of them old, and a single sheet of paper, yellowed and creased like it had been passed through a dozen hands. Across the top, in typewritten font, were the words, "Patrol Protocols, Sector North, night shift only." Below that were 8 rules. I remember them like scripture now, but that first night I laughed. Rule 1. Always begin your shift by circling the perimeter of Cold Hollow Cemetery. Leave 1 red carnation at the southern gate, even if the last one's still there. Rule 2. Do not acknowledge pedestrians after 11:47 p.m. They won't acknowledge you either. Rule 3. If a man in a tan coat waves you down, keep driving. He's not real, and he doesn't know it. Rule 4. If you stop for gas between midnight and 3 a.m., you'll see 2 pumps. Use the one on the left, never the right. Rule 5. Do not respond to any calls from Route 19 between 2:12 and 2:34 at Emma. That road doesn't exist during that time. Rule 6. If you lose sight of the moon, turn back immediately. You're not where you think you are. Rule 7. When the radio crackles with static at exactly 3:11 a.m., turn the volume down. You may hear your own voice. Do not respond. Rule 8. Never park beneath the old bridge. Not even for a second. I read them twice, then tucked the paper into the visor of my cruiser. I figured it was a scare tactic, or some backwoods tradition they made rookies endure. But something in Brody's eyes when he handed me the file said different. Something in the way no one else in the department even looked me in the eye. The town itself was quiet, almost too quiet. Cold Hollow was surrounded on all sides by the black root forest, with only one real road leading in and out. Main Street had 3 diners, a bait shop, a hardware store that also sold antique dolls for some reason, and a sheriff's office that still smelled like mildew and old typewriter ink. My first night on patrol started calm. I drove slow, headlights cutting through thick fog that clung to the streets like smoke. At 11:40, I pulled up outside Cold Hollow Cemetery. It was a sprawling thing iron gates, half rusted shut, gravestones jutting like teeth from the mist. I killed the engine and stepped out. The moment my boots hit the gravel, everything went still. Even the wind stopped. I left a red carnation by the southern gate like the rules said, and as I turned to head back to the cruiser, I swear I heard whispering. Not clear, just syllables on the edge of wind. I tried the radio. Dispatch, this is North Patrol. Cemetery check-in complete. Static. Then a voice not mine, not dispatch, whispered back. Not alone. My heart skipped. I shut the radio off and climbed back in the car. Probably a fluke, I told myself. Old radios picked up all kinds of weird signals. Midnight rolled in. I made the rounds, looping through fog-choked neighborhoods that looked empty, even during the day. Most houses had the curtains drawn tight. The ones that didn't had dark windows like black eyes. I turned down Ashcroft Road and saw a man standing beneath a flickering street lamp. Tan coat, thin, face tilted up, watching my cruiser approach. I slowed, his hand raised, then I remembered Rule 3. I kept my foot on the gas, didn't make eye contact, didn't wave. Just passed him like he wasn't there. The rearview mirror showed the same. Nothing, just fog. At 1:57 a.m., I hit the old station pump near Highway 7. Two pumps stood side by side, identical except for the faint red smear on the left one's nozzle. I remembered Rule 4. I used the left pump. Halfway through refueling, the right pump clicked on. No one there. Just the handle twitching slightly, like someone invisible was picking it up. I finished fast and left without looking back. The shift dragged. My nerves were shot. At 3:09 a.m., the sky began to change. The moon dimmed behind clouds so thick they looked painted in. Then the radio crackled, static. Then my own voice came through. Hey, can you hear me? I'm still in the woods. I never got out. Please, I need you to come back. Please. I slammed the volume down. My hands were shaking. The voice was mine, not a recording, not similar. Mine. The clock read 3:11. That's when I realized I hadn't seen the moon since the pump station. I checked the map. I was on Route 19. That road doesn't exist between 212 and 234, but it was 312. I stopped the cruiser, heart hammering, unsure what was worse, that the road had reappeared or that I'd never left it. Then I saw the bridge, the old one, covered in moss, iron rivets rusted to bone. I was parked under it, and something was knocking from the trunk. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared ahead as the knocks grew louder, like something inside was trying to get out, or trying to switch places. The rest of the shift was a blur. I don't remember driving back, don't remember the sun rising. Just remember walking into the station at dawn, pale and silent, while the chief nodded once and handed me a mug of coffee like it was nothing. You followed the rules, he said. You'll be fine. For now. The day after that first night didn't feel real. I slept until sunset and still woke up exhausted, like something had drained the marrow from my bones. My dreams had been a blur of fog and tapping sounds. of headlights cutting through endless woods, always chasing something just out of reach. At the station, no one asked how it went. Brody gave me a tight nod, like I'd passed some invisible threshold. Like I was no longer just a deputy, I was now part of whatever this place really was. Before I left for the shift, he handed me something, a small tarnished coin on a black leather cord. "You keep this in your pocket," he said quietly, "left side only. If it ever gets hot, do not stop driving." "What is it?" He shook his head. "Don't ask. That's the thing about Cold Hollow. People don't explain. They warn." I started the shift as usual carnations at the cemetery, one more already wilting beside where I placed mine. Whispering in the trees again, faint, like voices underwater. But the real trouble started around 2:20 a.m. when I got a call from dispatch. Not static, not my voice. Just a clean, normal transmission. "Unit 3 North, we've got a report of a child wandering near Route 19. Male, about 10 years old, wearing blue pajamas. Caller says he looks lost." I froze. That road didn't exist after 2:12. I knew that, but it was after 2:30 now. Technically safe. But I'd been down that road last night, and I hadn't come back the same. I hesitated. Then, against better judgment, I clicked the mic. 10-4, I'm en route. Route 19 looked different in the fog. The trees leaned in closer. The road itself had this warped quality, like it stretched longer the farther you drove. Then I saw him. A boy in blue pajamas, barefoot, standing just beyond the edge of the trees. His face was pale, too pale. I slowed the cruiser, rolled the window down an inch. "Hey there," I called. "You okay?" The boy didn't answer, just turned and walked deeper into the woods. And I followed. Rule 1, stay in the car between midnight and 3:33 a.m. I broke that rule. I left the cruiser running, door ajar, flashlight in hand. Every part of me screamed to turn back, but I followed the small blue silhouette weaving through the trees. "Kid," I said, breath misting in the air, "you need help?" That's when the boy stopped and spoke without turning around. "I don't belong to this night." The flashlight flickered. My breath hitched. Then he vanished, gone like fog and high beams. I stumbled back to the car, skin crawling. The coin in my pocket had gone hot, not warm scalding. I barely managed to grab the wheel and tear out of there, gravel spinning under the tires. For the next hour, the fog followed me, thicker than I'd ever seen it. My headlights barely cut 10 feet ahead. Shapes danced in the corners branches, maybe, or something else. I don't know. 3:11 a.m. came again. The radio crackled. I turned the volume down instinctively, but I still heard it. This time it wasn't my voice. It was my mom's. She'd been dead since I was 24, and the voice sounded just like her, soft, warm, full of guilt. "Danny," she whispered, "I'm sorry for what I did. I didn't mean to leave. I didn't mean to hurt you." I shut the radio off, tightened my grip on the wheel, drove in silence, and then I saw the bridge again. No, not again, but this time I didn't stop. The coin in my pocket flared white hot. I kept driving. Faster. The bridge loomed. Something stood in the middle of it, a figure draped in long robes, arms outstretched like a scarecrow made of bone and sorrow. I didn't stop. I closed my eyes and drove through it. When I looked back, the bridge was gone. Not behind me. Just not there at all. Two pulled into the station lot as dawn broke. Sat there for 10 minutes before I had the nerve to shut the car off. Brody was waiting by the steps again. He didn't smile. "You followed the coin," he said. I nodded, still trembling. "You broke a rule," he added. "Don't do that again. The boy, he's not what he seems." I opened my mouth, but he was already walking back inside. No explanation, just more warnings, more silence. That's the thing about Cold Hollow. The night doesn't want you to understand it. It wants you to obey. And if you don't, it shows you things. Things that look like your family. Things that speak in your voice. Things that know you. Awesome. Let's bring it home. My third night on shift began before the sun had even set. I'd spent the day lying in bed, curtains drawn, unable to sleep. Not from noise or daylight, but from knowing that something was waiting for me out there again. I kept feeling that burning coin in my pocket, even though it had gone cold hours ago, like a phantom limb, like a warning that hadn't finished speaking yet. When I showed up to the station just after sunset, Brody was already there. He handed me a fresh set of keys. "You're taking Unit 7 tonight?" I looked at him. "Why?" He stared at me for a long time, then simply said, "Because Unit 3 was seen driving itself through town at 4:17 this morning." He didn't elaborate. Didn't have to. I took the new cruiser. No one else was at the station when I left. Just me, the fog, and the rules burning in the back of my head. Tonight felt heavier. The air tasted metallic. The trees along the edge of town were too still, too quiet, as if they were waiting, like breath held in a darkened room. 12:14 a.m. First call came through. Not dispatch, the radio. "Deputy Carter, this is Deputy Carter. Do you copy?" I didn't answer. I turned the radio off, just in case. The road seemed to shift under me as I drove. Street signs with no writing. Trees I swore I'd passed already. Every few minutes I'd glance at the rearview mirror and see faint shapes in the fog figures with two long limbs, heads cocked like birds. I didn't look directly at them. 1:39, the tapping started. This time, not on the window, from the trunk. I stopped the cruiser in the middle of Main Street, sat there, staring straight ahead, as something inside the trunk knocked once, twice, then again in a rhythm like it was spelling something out. I didn't move, didn't get out. After 10 minutes, the knocking stopped, and something whispered my name from the inside, but I didn't move. 2:44 a.m. a call came in. Static first, then a voice I recognized. It was Brody, but not from the station. It was him in distress. "Carter need backup North Woods by Old Bell's Quarry. Something's out here." The transmission fizzled. I reached for the mic, paused. "There may be a patrol car that looks like ours. Don't acknowledge it." I hadn't seen the car yet, but the rule came screaming back to me. Then, as if summoned by my hesitation, headlights flared behind me. I turned the rear view just enough to see the grill of another patrol cruiser. Numbers were wrong, paint was flaking, and it was idling right behind me. Then the radio blared again. "Carter, please, I think it has me. I can't move. I think it's in the trees. Please come." But it wasn't desperate. It was smiling. I could hear the grin in the voice. That wasn't Brody. I shut the radio off. I didn't move until the cruiser behind me pulled away, vanishing into the mist like a mirage. 3:31 minutes before the final rule. That's when I saw her, my mother, standing in the road up ahead. She'd been gone for 15 years. Car accident, open casket. I knew she was dead, but there she was, bathed in fog, wearing the same blue sweater she died in. She waved me down. I didn't stop. As I passed her, she stepped toward the car. I heard her whisper, "I'm so proud of you, Danny." It shattered something in me. But I didn't stop. 3:33 a.m. The radio came alive again. Every voice I'd ever loved spoke in turn. My father, my sister, even my old K-9 partner who died in my arms 6 years ago. "Come back to us. Just one turn, please." I screamed and shut the radio off. Tears burned in my eyes. And then I saw the end of the road. The gate, the one they say only appears once you've survived 3 nights, the one they say only opens for those who followed every rule. The road past, it was dark, but not wrong, not cursed, just empty dot waiting. I didn't hesitate. I drove through, and the fog didn't follow. Dawn broke over Coal Hollow, and for the first time the night didn't feel like it had teeth. When I pulled back into the station lot, Brody was waiting, arms crossed. "You made it," I nodded. Couldn't speak. "Now you know what's really out there. The hollow lets some of us see. Those who can handle it." He handed me a new sheet of paper. More rules. "But you're not just on night shift anymore, Carter?" I looked down at the paper. This wasn't patrol. This was containment. And now I was part of it. The tunnel beneath the lake. My name's Ethan, and I never believed in urban legends. Ghost stories, creepypasta, all that stuff. It's entertaining, sure, but I always figured it was just people trying to scare each other. That was before last summer, before I learned that some stories are more than just legends. It started when my friend Nate told me about the tunnel. We were sitting on the dock at Hollow Lake, passing around a cheap bottle of whiskey. The water was completely still, the surface reflecting the moonlight like a sheet of black glass. It was one of those quiet, humid summer nights where even the crickets seemed too tired to chirp. "You ever hear about the old tunnel?" Nate asked, his voice low. I shook my head. "What tunnel?" Nate leaned closer. "They built it back in the 50s. A maintenance tunnel under the lake for the water treatment plant. Problem is, the project got abandoned after a bunch of workers went missing." "Missing?" I scoffed. "Sounds like a campfire story." Nate grinned. "Yeah, probably, but some of the bodies were found. Or parts of them, anyway. Official report said industrial accident, but nobody bought that. After a few more people disappeared, they sealed the tunnel up. Supposedly it's still down there under the lake. I rolled my eyes. And I'm guessing you know how to get in? Maybe, Nate said, his grin widening. You in? I should have said no. I should have laughed it off and gone home. But the whiskey was warming my veins, and Nate's cocky smirk pissed me off just enough to make me want to prove him wrong. Let's go, I said. We rowed across the lake in Nate's old aluminum canoe, the paddles cutting through the water with slow rhythmic splashes. The moon was hidden behind a thin veil of clouds, and the further we got from shore, the darker it became. My stomach was already tightening with unease, but I forced myself to keep going. About halfway across the lake, Nate pointed to a cluster of rocks jutting out of the water. We tied the canoe to one of them and climbed out onto the slippery surface. Nate pulled out a crowbar and started working at a rusted metal grate set into the rocks. After a few minutes, the grate groaned and fell inward with a loud clang that echoed across the water. There it is, Nate said, shining his flashlight into the hole. A stone passageway sloped downward into blackness. This feels like a bad idea, I muttered. Come on, Nate said. Don't tell me you're scared. I wasn't about to let Nate call me a coward, so I climbed in after him. The tunnel was narrow and wet, the walls slick with algae and condensation. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and rust. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, but the lights seemed to dissolve just a few feet ahead of us. We walked for what felt like hours. The deeper we went, the colder it got. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight. I was about to suggest turning back when we heard it, a sound like someone breathing. Did you hear that? I whispered. Nate nodded. Yeah. We stood there, frozen, listening. The sound of breathing grew louder, echoing through the tunnel. Hello, Nate called out. The breathing stopped. And then we heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from up ahead. Nate aimed his flashlight down the tunnel. The beam illuminated the shape of a man standing about 30 feet away. His skin was pale and mottled, his eyes wide and glassy. He was wearing a tattered work uniform, something out of the 50s. Sir? Nate called. Are you okay? The man didn't respond. He just stood there, swaying slightly. Nate, I said, stepping back, we need to go. Nate took a step forward. Hey, we can help you. The man's head jerked unnaturally to the side. Then he started walking toward us, ... No, not walking, gliding. His feet weren't touching the ground. Run, I screamed. We turned and sprinted back the way we came, our flashlights swinging wildly. The sound of footsteps followed us, impossibly fast. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the man floating just a few feet behind us, his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. We reached a fork in the tunnel, and Nate made a hard left. I followed, slipping on the wet floor. My knee hit the ground hard, sending a bolt of pain up my leg. Come on, Nate shouted. We scrambled through, slamming the door shut behind us. I heard the sound of metal scraping against metal as the thing on the other side clawed at the door. We ran up the tunnel, and suddenly we were climbing out through the grate. We pulled ourselves onto the rocks, gasping for breath. Behind us, the tunnel entrance sat dark and still. Nate sat back, his hands shaking. What the hell was that? I don't know, I said. but I'm not coming back to find out. We got back in the canoe and paddled toward the shore. Neither of us spoke. When we reached the dock, we sat there for a long time, just staring out at the water. A week later, I saw an article in the local paper. 2 fishermen had gone missing on the lake, vanished without a trace. Nate and I never talked about the tunnel again. He left town not long after. I stayed, but I don't go near Hollow Lake anymore. Sometimes when the night is quiet and the wind is just right, I swear I can hear that sound, the slow, measured breathing, echoing across the water. And sometimes I think I see a pale figure standing at the edge of the lake, just waiting for someone else to be curious enough to go looking, because some doors once opened never close. The house on Black Hollow Road. My name's Ben, and I've always been fascinated by old houses. The creaking floorboards, the peeling wallpaper, the sense that someone or something might still be lingering there. It's why I took up house flipping as a side hustle. Find a cheap, abandoned house, fix it up, and sell it for a profit. It was a simple plan until I bought the house on Black Hollow Road. It started when my real estate agent called me about a property that had just gone up for auction. A 3-story Victorian manor built in the late 1800s, sitting on 5 acres of forested land. The listing price was suspiciously low, almost too good to be true. It's a steal, the agent had said. Needs a little work, but nothing you can't handle. I should have trusted my instincts when I pulled up to the house for the first time. It was surrounded by a tall iron fence, the gate rusted and hanging slightly off its hinges. The house itself was massive, dark red brick covered in ivy, with tall, narrow windows that seemed to watch me as I approached. I stepped out of my truck, crunching gravel beneath my boots. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm. Still, the house had potential. I walked up the stone steps and unlocked the front door with the key the agent had left for me. The door creaked open, revealing a grand entrance hall. A massive staircase wound up to the 2nd floor, and the light from my phone's flashlight reflected off a dusty crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. The house was colder inside than it should have been. Even though it was the middle of summer, my breath fogged in the air as I stepped inside. Just old pipes, I muttered to myself. The first few days were uneventful. I cleaned out the debris, stripped the peeling wallpaper, and made a list of repairs. The place was quiet, unnervingly so, but I figured it was just the isolation. Then the noises started. At first it was small things, a soft tapping from the walls, a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere upstairs. I chalked it up to mice or raccoons. Old houses make noise. It's part of the deal. But then it got worse. Late one night I was working on restoring the fireplace in the sitting room when I heard the sound of footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate. I froze, listening. I lived alone. No one else should have been in the house. I grabbed a crowbar and made my way upstairs. The hallway was dark, my phone's flashlight barely illuminating the faded floral wallpaper. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I moved toward the end of the hall. One of the doors was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my breath coming in short gasps. The room was empty, just an old bedroom, stripped bare except for a rusted bed frame and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror, a figure, tall, thin, pale, standing directly behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. I backed out of the room, heart hammering in my chest. The figure in the mirror had been wrong somehow. Its face didn't look human, too long, too angular. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the real estate agent. Did the previous owner mention anything strange about this place? There was a pause on the other end. Well, the agent said slowly, the house has a bit of history. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of history? Look, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but the house belonged to the Holloway family. They built it in the 1880s. Old money. Lived there for generations. And they all died, the agent said. All of them. The last Holloway, a man named Richard, killed his wife and 2 daughters in the house before hanging himself from the chandelier in the foyer. That was about 50 years ago. Why didn't you tell me this before? You didn't ask, the agent said. I hung up, feeling sick. That night I woke to the sound of whispering. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized I was awake, and the whispering was real. It was coming from the hallway. I sat up, my heart racing. My bedroom door was open. I swear I had closed it before bed. The whispering grew louder, and I could hear multiple voices now. Low, faint, like the sound of wind through dead leaves. I grabbed the crowbar from under my bed and stepped into the hall. At the far end, a door I knew had been locked since I moved in was now standing wide open. I shone my light into the room. It was a nursery. Old wooden cribs lined the walls, covered in cobwebs and dust. And sitting in one of the cribs was a doll. It was old, cracked porcelain, with black glass eyes and matted hair. The whispering stopped. I took a step back. The doll's head turned toward me. I ran. I sprinted down the hallway and down the stairs. The chandelier above me swayed violently, as though some unseen force was shaking it. The front door wouldn't budge. I yanked on it, but it was like the house itself didn't want me to leave. Footsteps pounded down the stairs behind me, dot, dot. I turned and saw Richard Holloway standing there, or what was left of him. His skin was gray and rotting. His eyes were black pits. His mouth stretched into a horrible grin as he stepped toward me. You can't leave, he said, dot, dot. The glass panes on the windows shattered as the chandelier tore free from the ceiling, crashing to the floor just inches from me. I turned and sprinted toward the back of the house. I found the old storm door leading to the basement and forced it open. I crawled through just as the house began to shake. I ran through the dark, through the woods behind the house, not stopping until I saw the lights of the main road. The house burned that night. I don't know how it happened, but when I drove by the next morning, it was nothing but a charred ruin. But the story doesn't end there. A few months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a doll, the same one from the nursery. There was a note attached. We're still waiting for you. I smashed the doll with a hammer and buried the pieces in a field miles away from my house. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispering, and sometimes I wake up to find my bedroom door open, even though I'm sure I closed it before bed. I don't flip houses anymore, and I never go near Black Hollow Road, because some houses don't want to be fixed. Some houses don't want to let you leave. and some things once invited and never really leave. The Whispering House. My name's Ethan, and I've always been fascinated by old houses. The more run-down and mysterious, the better. There's just something about the faded wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, and the musty air that makes me feel like I'm touching the past. I guess that's why I didn't hesitate when I got the pay was good, and the owners said they just needed someone to keep an eye on the place while they were away. It sounded perfect, peaceful, a chance to get some writing done and relax in the quiet. I should have known better. The house was massive, much bigger than I'd expected. 3 floors, a sprawling library, and hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. The exterior was weathered stone, ivy creeping up the walls, the windows set deep into the facade like eyes watching the world with quiet malice. The drive up to the house had taken me through miles of dense forest, and by the time I pulled into the long, circular driveway, I couldn't see another building or even a road in any direction, just trees. The owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Carraway, met me at the door. He was tall and thin, with hollow cheeks and watery gray eyes. His wife, Eleanor, stood behind him, her eyes downcast. Mr. Carraway smiled thinly and handed me a heavy iron key. "The house is simple enough," he said. "The kitchen is stocked. The bedroom's upstairs. You'll find the power breakers in the basement if anything goes out. And, well, if you hear anything at night, just ignore it." That last part made me pause. "What do you mean by that?" "Oh, nothing," he said quickly. "Just old pipes. This house. It's old. Old houses make noises." That was the first red flag, but I was too focused on the easy money to care. I told myself I'd stay one night, and if anything weird happened, I'd leave. I should have left right then. After the Carraways left, I explored the house. It was even larger than I'd thought, full of high ceilings and heavy oak doors. The furniture was antique and well-maintained, but the whole place had a strange vibe. The air was cold, and not just because it was October. It felt wrong. The first night started quietly enough. I made some dinner, settled in front of the library fireplace with a book, and started to relax. Around midnight, I heard the first sound. It was soft at first, a faint whispering sound coming from the ceiling above me. It was so quiet I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then it came again, a child's voice, a soft, breathy whisper. "Come upstairs." I stood up, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. I stood there for a long time, listening, but nothing else came. Finally, I convinced myself it was just the wind or maybe something shifting in the old beams. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. The next night it got worse. I was sitting in the library again when I heard it. This time it was louder, clearer. "Come upstairs." It wasn't just one voice. It was multiple children, their voices overlapping, whispering the same thing over and over. "Come upstairs, come upstairs, come upstairs." I stood, clutching the arm of the chair. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. Then I heard something else, a soft thump and another. Footsteps coming from the second floor. My rational mind told me to leave, but my curiosity pushed me toward the staircase. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, just in case. My foot hit the first step, and the whispers stopped. Dead silence. I forced myself to climb the stairs, my heart hammering so loudly it was hard to hear anything else. The hallway stretched out before me, lit only by the pale moonlight coming through the tall windows. That's when I saw it, a child, a girl in a white nightgown standing at the end of the hallway. She was barefoot, her long blonde hair hanging over her face. She turned toward me slowly, and when her head tilted upward, I saw her eyes, black, hollow. She opened her mouth, her jaw unhinged in a grotesque way far wider than any human mouth should open. "Come upstairs," she whispered. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The temperature in the hallway plummeted, and my breath came out in white clouds. The girl's head snapped toward the wall, and then, with a sound like tearing fabric, she melted into the darkness. I stumbled back toward the stairs, but the floor beneath me shifted. The walls began to pulse, the wallpaper peeling away to reveal dark, wet stone underneath. The house was changing, and then I heard the footsteps again, more than one set this time. Figures were coming out of the shadows, thin, pale shapes with hollow eyes and twisted limbs. Some wore tattered hospital gowns. Others were dressed in old-fashioned suits and dresses, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. I ran. I barreled down the stairs, the house shaking beneath my feet. When I reached the front door, it wouldn't open. The key twisted in the lock, but the door stayed shut. "Come upstairs," they whispered. "Come upstairs." I pounded on the door. "Let me out." Something cold touched my shoulder. I spun around and saw one of them standing inches from me. His face was withered and decayed, his mouth stretching into a hideous smile. "You can't leave," he whispered. "You're part of the house now." I lunged for the window beside the door and drove the fireplace poker through the glass. It shattered. I pulled myself through the broken frame, feeling glass tear through my clothes and into my skin. I hit the gravel driveway hard. My ankle twisted beneath me, but I forced myself to stand and run toward my car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I tore down the driveway, not stopping until I was miles away from that place. The Carraways never contacted me. I heard through someone else that the house was sold to another family a few months later. I don't know what happened to them. I never told anyone the full story until now. I barely slept for weeks after that night. The nightmares were constant. The whispers, the faces, the feeling of that cold hand on my shoulder. But the worst part? Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear it. A faint whisper just at the edge of hearing. "Come upstairs." And sometimes I think I see her, the girl in the white nightgown, watching me from the corner of my room, waiting for me to come upstairs. The Cave of Lost Echoes. My name is Ryan, and I need to tell you about what happened last summer. We were just a group of normal teenagers looking for an adventure, something to kill the boredom of small-town life. We thought we were invincible, thought nothing could really touch us. But we were wrong. It started with Jack's idea. It was always Jack's idea. Jack was my best friend since we were kids. He was the leader, the one who pushed the limits, who always had a new scheme or plan to keep us entertained. Then there was Emily, Jack's girlfriend. sharp, funny, and always the smartest person in the room. Connor and Lacey rounded out the group. Connor was Jack's cousin, big, athletic, kind of a meathead but loyal to a fault. Lacey was Emily's best friend, quiet, but with a rebellious streak that showed when you least expected it. The five of us had spent the summer hanging out by the lake, sneaking beers from Connor's older brother, and driving around with no real destination. But by August, we were running out of ideas. That's when Jack suggested the cave. "I heard about it from my dad," Jack said one evening as we sat on the hood of his car, parked at the overlook above town. "It's up in the woods past the old quarry. Supposedly it goes deep, like really deep." "So?" Connor asked. Jack's eyes gleamed. "So, no one's been to the bottom?" Emily rolled her eyes. "Because it's probably dangerous." "That's the point," Jack grinned. I should have known better. Jack had a way of making the dumbest ideas sound like the best plan in the world. "Come on," he said. "What else are we doing? Sitting around, doing nothing?" "I'm not going," Emily said. "Same," Lacey added. Jack looked at Connor. "What about you?" Connor grinned. "I'm in." Jack turned toward me. "Ryan?" I hesitated. The thought of crawling around in some dark hole underground didn't exactly sound appealing, but I didn't want to be the only one left out. That's how Jack always got you. Made you feel like you'd miss something epic if you didn't follow him. "All right," I said. "I'm in." That's how it started. We set out the next morning. Jack's dad had an old set of camping gear we borrowed. Flashlights, ropes, harnesses, helmets. I tried to ignore the fact that some of the equipment looked pretty worn out. Jack drove us out toward the quarry. We parked just off the road and hiked up through the woods for about an hour before we found the entrance. It didn't look like much, just a narrow hole at the base of a rock formation, a gap between the earth and the stone. The opening was dark, cold air seeping from the mouth, like the cave itself was breathing. Jack was already pulling on his harness. "Jack," Emily said, arms crossed, "this is stupid." "Then don't come," he shrugged. "No one's forcing you." Connor was grinning as he strapped on his gear. I felt that familiar pull, Jack's contagious energy. He made everything feel like a game, like it was fun. "Come on," he said. "We'll go down, check it out, and be back before dark, easy." "Famous last words," Emily muttered. Jack dropped down first, disappearing into the darkness with a cocky, "See you losers at the bottom." Connor followed next, then me. The rope slid through my gloves as I lowered myself down. The walls of the cave were cold and damp, covered in patches of moss and strange white lichen. My headlamp cast thin beams of light that barely seemed to penetrate the blackness. Below me, I heard Jack's voice echoing up. "Hurry up, Ryan, you're holding up the line." "Shut up," I muttered. I hit solid ground about 15 feet down. Jack and Connor were already unhooking themselves. The floor of the cave was uneven stone, slick with moisture. Ahead, the tunnel stretched out, disappearing into the darkness. "Holy shit," Connor said. "It's huge." Jack was already moving forward. "Come on." I hesitated. There was something off about the place, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But Connor followed Jack without hesitation, so I followed too. We moved deeper. The air grew colder. The walls tightened in places. forcing us to squeeze through narrow gaps before opening up again. The light from our headlamps bounced off jagged stone and dripping stalactites. We were maybe 100 feet in when I heard it, a whisper. I stopped, turning my head. "Did you hear that?" Connor frowned. "Hear what?" "A voice," I said. "It sounded like whispering." Jack grinned. "Dude, you're just imagining things." But I wasn't. It came again. Soft, faint, like someone speaking from far away. "Ryan." I spun toward Jack. "You didn't hear that?" Jack's smile faltered. He opened his mouth to say something when suddenly, bang! The ground beneath us shifted. A low, rumbling sound rolled through the tunnel. "Shit," Jack said. "What the hell was that?" Connor shouted. The sound grew louder, a deep grinding, like stone sliding against stone. Then the floor beneath our feet buckled. "Move!" Jack screamed. We ran. The tunnel behind us collapsed with a deafening roar. Dust and debris filled the air. I stumbled, nearly falling. Connor pulled me upright, and we kept running until we reached another chamber, a wide, open cavern with a shallow pool of water at its center. Jack turned, gasping for breath. "Everyone okay?" I coughed, trying to catch my breath. Connor nodded. The tunnel behind us was gone, blocked by tons of rock. "We're trapped," Connor said. "No shit," Jack muttered. I turned toward the cavern. The water was perfectly still, except for small ripples spreading across the surface. A soft sound echoed through the chamber. Dripping, plip, plip, plip. Jack's headlamp swept across the far side of the chamber. The wall there was covered in strange markings, symbols carved into the stone, primitive shapes and lines. Some looked like faces, distorted, screaming faces. "What the hell is this?" Connor whispered. "I don't know," Jack said. His headlamp flickered, casting strange shadows over the carvings, and then the whispering started again. Only now it was louder, clearer. "Ryan." Jack and Connor froze. We all heard it that time. The whispering turned into voices. Murmuring, overlapping, a chorus of soft, rasping tones. The water at the center of the cavern began to ripple more violently. A figure stepped out of the shadows on the far side of the chamber. It was tall and thin, with long limbs and dark, wet skin. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, pale white orbs with no pupils. It smiled, its mouth stretching too wide. It whispered something. I don't know what it said, but it made my chest tighten. My knees went weak. Jack stepped backward. "What the fuck is that?" The figure's head snapped toward us. Its smile widened. And then it started moving toward us, screamed. Connor grabbed me by the arm. "Run." We turned and sprinted toward the nearest tunnel. The thing followed. I could hear it moving, its limbs dragging along the stone floor. We stumbled into the tunnel, panting and gasping. Behind us, the thing's whispering grew louder. "Ryan, come back, come back." Jack's headlamp flickered. Then we heard the sound, not whispering, breathing. Loud, wet, and right behind us. The sound of wet breathing was so close I could feel the moisture in the air. My heart hammered against my chest as Connor yanked me down the narrow tunnel, Jack right behind us. Our headlamps bounced violently as we stumbled over jagged rocks and uneven ground. "It's still coming," Jack shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I didn't need him to tell me. I could feel it behind us, the cold pressure of its presence, the way the air seemed to hum with wrongness. The whispering was growing louder, overlapping voices bleeding into each other. Ryan, Jack, Connor, the sound of our names being spoken in that twisted, sing-song voice made my stomach drop. "Where are we going?" I shouted. "No idea," Connor said. We rounded a sharp bend, the tunnel splitting into two paths. Without hesitation, Connor veered left, dragging me with him. Jack cursed behind us, but followed. The tunnel narrowed, the rough stone scraping my shoulders as we ran. My foot caught on something, a rock or root, and I went down hard, my hands slamming into the cold, wet ground. "Ryan!" Connor yelled. I groaned, trying to push myself up. My palms were stinging. Jack skidded to a stop behind me, grabbing my arm and hauling me upright. "We have to keep moving." But then the whispering stopped. Complete silence. I felt a pressure in my chest, like the air had been sucked out of the tunnel. My headlamp flickered. Connor's light dimmed. Jack's went out completely. "Shit," Jack said, his voice tight with fear. A soft sound drifted through the darkness. A tapping, slow, steady, like fingernails on stone. Connor raised his headlamp toward the far end of the tunnel. That's when we saw it. A shape emerged from the darkness, tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head cocked unnaturally to the side. Its skin was gray, glistening in the weak light. Its eyes, pale white orbs, seemed to reflect the light from Connor's headlamp. It smiled, stretching its mouth far too wide. "Run," I whispered. It lunged. We took off, sprinting down the narrow tunnel. I could feel it gaining on us, the sound of its limbs scraping along the stone floor. We burst into another chamber, larger this time with high sloping walls that disappeared into the darkness above. Patches of pale fungus glowed faintly along the walls, casting the room in an eerie greenish light. "Where the hell are we?" Jack gasped. Connor was already scanning the walls. There, at the far end of the chamber, was a jagged opening. Another tunnel, smaller, narrower. It might have been a dead end, but it was our only option. Connor pulled me toward it. Jack hesitated, glancing back toward the tunnel we'd come from. "Come on," Connor shouted. Jack ran toward us. We squeezed through the narrow gap, the stone scraping our backs. Jack's foot slipped, and Connor grabbed his arm, yanking him through just as the creature lunged into the chamber behind us. Its pale eyes gleamed in the dim light. It smiled, and then it stepped back. "What? Why isn't it following us?" Jack whispered. I didn't have an answer. I didn't want an answer. We turned and kept moving. The tunnel twisted and narrowed until we had to crawl on our hands and knees. The rock was cold beneath my palms. I could feel moisture seeping through my jeans as I dragged myself forward. "I hate this," Jack muttered. "I hate this so much." Connor's breathing was ragged ahead of me. We crawled for what felt like hours before the tunnel widened enough for us to stand. The air was warmer here, heavier. My headlamp flickered again, then steadied. "Where the hell are we?" Jack said. Connor swept his light across the cavern. The walls were smoother here, almost polished. Strange carvings covered every surface, shapes and symbols etched into the rock. Jack approached one of the carvings. "These are people," he said slowly. He was right. The symbols were humanoid figures, carved in jagged, uneven lines. Some were standing, others were lying down, and some were missing parts. Connor's headlamp settled on the far wall. His breath hitched. Oh shit. I followed his light. The carvings there were different, twisted shapes with elongated limbs and pale eyes. The figures were surrounding the others, reaching for them with clawed hands. Beneath the carving was a single word etched into the stone. Echo. Jack shook his head. What the hell does that mean? Connor's light swept across the floor, and that's when we saw it. Bones. Human bones, scattered across the cavern floor. Some were old, yellowed, and brittle. Others were fresher. Pieces of torn fabric were mixed among them, faded blue denim, fragments of leather. Jack backed away. Nope, this is messed up. A soft sound echoed through the cavern. Plip. We all turned toward the sound. A dark shape was rising from the floor. It was pulling itself out of the ground. Its limbs were long and thin, its skin glistening with moisture. Its face was wrong, distorted, stretched unnaturally. Its eyes were white. The creature rose to its full height, taller than any human. Its mouth split open into a wide grin, exposing rows of jagged teeth. Jack screamed. Connor grabbed me by the arm and pulled me toward the nearest exit. We scrambled into another tunnel as the thing's limbs scraped against the stone behind. We didn't stop until we reached another chamber. Smaller this time, Connor collapsed against the wall, panting. Jack was shaking, his face pale. What the hell was that? Jack gasped. Connor's hands were trembling. I don't know. That thing, it came out of the ground. Jack's eyes were wild. What the hell is down here? Connor shook his head. It's not just down here. Jack frowned. What are you talking about? Connor shined his light toward the far side of the chamber. The carvings there were newer, sharper. They depicted more humanoid shapes surrounded by the twisted figures. Connor's voice was low and cold. They've been watching us. Suddenly, my headlamp flickered. Flip, flip. I turned toward the sound. From the far tunnel, something moved. A shape emerged from the darkness. Its eyes gleamed white in the dim light. Its mouth twisted into a smile, and then another shape emerged behind it. Then another and another. Jack stumbled backward. We need to get out of here. Connor raised his headlamp toward the far wall. Another tunnel, narrow. We can squeeze through there, Connor said. Go, Jack shouted. Connor went first. Jack followed. I moved toward the tunnel, but then I heard it, a voice. Ryan, I turned. The figure stood in the middle of the chamber. Its white eyes gleamed in the dim light. Come back. I stumbled backward into the tunnel. Jack grabbed me. Don't stop. We crawled through the tunnel, the whispering growing louder behind us. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. We emerged into another chamber, larger this time, with a wide slope leading downward. Connor collapsed, gasping for air. Jack was pale, sweat dripping down his face. And behind us, the whispering grew louder. Jack's headlamp swept across the chamber. The slope led to a dark pit at the far end. Jack shook his head. No way. I'm not going down there. Connor's face was white. I don't think we have a choice. The whispering rose to a deafening roar, and then, from the pit, something moved, something big. The whispering swelled, rising into a chaotic chorus that filled the cavern. The voices seemed to come from everywhere, above, behind, and deep within the yawning pit that stretched before us. ... We have to go down there? Jack stammered, his voice barely audible above the noise. We don't have a choice, Connor said grimly. If we stay here... He trailed off, his eyes fixed on the shadowy shapes crawling from the tunnel behind us. ... Figures, pale-skinned things with distorted faces and white, empty eyes were filling the passageway. Their twisted smiles stretched too wide, and their limbs jerked unnaturally as they moved. Go, I shouted. Connor grabbed Jack's arm, and we bolted down the rocky slope toward the pit. The ground became uneven, the stones slick with moisture. My boots skidded dangerously, and Jack nearly lost his footing. Watch the edge, Connor warned. The pit loomed ahead like a gaping wound in the earth. The deeper we descended, the colder the air became. My breath fogged the air in front of me, and the damp stones seemed to sweat beneath my fingers. We reached the edge of the pit, and I realized how deep it really was. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the faint glow of our headlamps. The whispering voices drifted up from the depths, distorted and fragmented like a broken radio signal. What now? Jack asked, his voice shaking. Connor scanned the walls. His light caught something. Old ropes, frayed and knotted, tied around metal spikes hammered into the rock. Looks like someone's been down there before, he muttered. That's not a good thing, Jack barked. I know, Connor said, tying one of the ropes around his waist. But if there's another way out, it's down there. Wait, Jack grabbed Connor's arm. What if this is what it wants? What are you talking about? Jack pointed toward the pit. The carvings, the whispers. Those things. Maybe they're driving us down there on purpose. Connor's face twisted with frustration. We don't have time to argue. Behind us, the twisted figures were closing in, their pale eyes gleaming. One of them let out a garbled screech, and they surged forward. Connor grabbed the rope and rappelled into the pit. Come on. Jack hesitated, staring at the approaching figures, then grabbed another rope and followed. I barely managed to loop a rope around my waist before one of the creatures lunged at me, a twisted thing with jagged teeth and clawed fingers. I kicked out, connecting with its arm, and stumbled backward over the pit's edge. For a sickening moment, I was falling. The rope jerked tight, and my breath left my lungs in a choked gasp. Ryan, Connor called from below. You okay? Yeah, I coughed. I descended as fast as I could, my fingers burning against the rope. Above, the creatures gathered at the pit's edge, staring down at us. Their pale faces were twisted with amusement, like they knew something we didn't. I didn't like that. We reached the bottom of the pit, landing in a narrow tunnel that stretched on in both directions. The air was damp and stale, carrying the scent of rot and stagnant water. Which way? Jack asked. Connor's headlamp flickered, and the whispering grew louder, closer. Doesn't matter, Connor said. We keep moving. We pushed forward, the tunnel walls tightening around us. The carvings continued here, distorted shapes with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. I kept my head down, afraid of what I might see if I studied them too closely. That's when we saw it, an old wooden door warped and swollen with moisture. Rusty chains had been hammered across it, but some were snapped and broken. The door itself hung half open, revealing a faint glow inside. I don't like this, Jack muttered. I don't either, Connor replied, but he pushed the door open. The room beyond was wrong. The walls seemed to curve and pulse like they were breathing. Strange symbols had been etched into the stone, and in the center of the room stood a crude altar. Bones, human bones, were piled around it, twisted and arranged in strange patterns. "Oh, God," Jack whispered. The whispering was deafening now, filling the room like a chorus of tormented souls. "We need to keep moving," Connor said, but his voice wavered. "Wait," I said, pointing toward the far wall. There was another tunnel, narrow and lined with sharp stones, but something was moving inside, ... Figures not like the twisted things we'd seen before, but something worse. These figures were more human, their bodies broken and rotting. Their faces were familiar, hollow-eyed reflections of the carvings on the walls. Those are people," Jack stammered. "No," Connor said, "not anymore." The figures began to crawl toward us, their bones grinding as they moved. Their empty eyes locked onto us, and the whispering rose to a deafening roar. "Run!" Connor shouted. We bolted through the nearest tunnel, the creatures closing in behind us. The tunnel twisted and branched in all directions, but we kept moving, hoping for some sign of an exit. Then we saw it, a sliver of light ahead, a faint flickering glow. "Go!" Connor shouted. We sprinted toward the light. The air grew warmer, the scent of damp earth giving way to fresh air. The whispering faded behind us, ... We emerged from the cave and stumbled into the open air, gasping and trembling. The sky above was tinged with the early morning light, the faint glow of sunrise breaking over the horizon. For a moment we stood in silence, breathing in the cold morning air. Did we make it?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Connor turned back toward the cave entrance. "I think so," he said. But as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the cave mouth, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Deep inside the shadows of the cave, just before the darkness swallowed it whole, a figure was standing there, watching, smiling, and it whispered my name. We made it home. We told our families we'd gotten lost, that we'd wandered the wrong path, that nothing serious had happened. They believed us, but we knew better. The whispers haven't stopped. Sometimes, late at night, I hear them outside my window, faint and distant. Sometimes I'll catch movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow too large to be explained away. And sometimes I wake up with a faint memory of pale eyes watching me from the foot of my bed. The thing in the cave is still out there, and I think it's waiting for me to come back, because whatever we did down there, we set it free. The Hollow Ward. I've been a nurse for 7 years. You'd think after all this time I'd be used to working night shifts. The endless hum of fluorescent lights, the steady beep of monitors, the quiet shuffle of patients' slippers on the tile floor, it becomes white noise after a while. But St. Augustine's Hospital was different. It had a reputation. The old wing, the Hollow Ward, as staff called it, had been closed down for over 30 years. Structural damage, according to the official report. Mold and broken pipes, they said. But anyone who worked here long enough knew there was more to it than that. People whispered about strange occurrences, missing patients, unexplained noises, shadows moving in empty halls. I never put much stock in ghost stories. until the night I was assigned to the hollow ward. It was supposed to be temporary. Staffing issues, they said. Just one shift to cover a few patients who'd been moved there during renovations. No big deal. I clocked in at 11 p.m. The nurse's station on the main floor was busier than usual, and I caught sight of the head nurse, Carol, waving me over. "We're short-staffed again," she said, handing me a clipboard. "You'll be covering the hollow ward tonight." I froze. Why would we even have patients in there? Carol's eyes darted toward the hallway leading to the old wing. "Overflow from the main AA," she said quickly. "Renovations have closed 2 wings, so we've had to use the old floor for temporary cases. Don't worry, it's just 2 patients. Quiet ones." I hesitated. "Can't someone else? We're short." "You're it." I sighed, took the clipboard, and headed toward the hollow ward. The entrance was at the far end of the main floor, marked by a pair of heavy double doors. The glass panes were covered in grime, and a battered sign read "Restricted Area." I pushed open the doors, and immediately the temperature dropped. The hallway stretched ahead, long and dimly lit. The walls were lined with cracked tiles, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and bleach. My footsteps echoed unervingly loud. "Just a shift," I muttered. "Just a few hours." The patients' names were on the clipboard. Room 304 and 307. I checked the map. 3rd floor, east side. Easy enough. I took the old elevator, which shuddered to life with a groan of protest. As I ascended, the lights flickered. My reflection in the tarnished metal walls looked pale and strained. The elevator doors opened onto the 3rd floor, and the hallway stretched out before me in oppressive silence. Click, 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 I froze. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. Just the soft hum of the hospital's aging ventilation system. "It's just your imagination." Room 304 was the first one on the right. I peeked inside. An elderly woman lay in the bed, her thin form barely a bump under the sheets. Her name on the chart was Marjorie Lewis. She was hooked up to a heart monitor, her breathing shallow. I checked her vitals, adjusted her 4, and whispered, "You're doing fine, Mrs. Lewis." She didn't respond. I turned to leave, and then her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I yelped. Her eyes were open now, pale and glassy. "Don't let him in," she whispered. "Mrs. Lewis," I said, my heart hammering. Her grip tightened, painfully. "He's already here," she said, her voice thin and strained. I pulled my hand away and stumbled into the hallway, breathing hard. "She's confused," I told myself. "Delirium. Happens all the time." I moved on to room 307. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, a young man lay motionless on the bed. He was in his 20s, pale, with dark hair matted to his forehead. His chart read Ethan Connors. No history of mental illness. No significant medical conditions. Just a bad case of dehydration and exhaustion after collapsing at work. I adjusted his 4 and brushed his hair away from his face. His skin was cold to the touch. His eyes fluttered open. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. I frowned. "You're safe. Just rest, okay?" "No," Ethan said. His gaze was glassy and unfocused. "He knows you're here now." "What are you talking about?" "He's waking up." Suddenly Ethan sat bolt upright, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The heart monitor flatlined. "Oh, God!" I shouted. I grabbed the crash cart and tried to stabilize him, pressing the defibrillator pads to his chest. "Come on." Ethan's eyes snapped open, and I froze. His pupils were pitch black. A terrible smile spread across his face. "He's here." The monitor screeched, and Ethan's body arched unnaturally off the bed. His arms flailed, and the bed frame rattled. Suddenly he collapsed, his body limp. The heart monitor beeped steadily. His eyes were closed again. I stumbled back, shaking. What the hell is going on? I backed into the hallway and heard the sound of footsteps coming from the far end. The elevator at the end of the hall opened with a low chime. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a faded doctor's coat. His face was pale and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and deep-set black eyes. His smile was unervingly wide. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a soft, calm voice. I stumbled back. Who are you?" He took a step closer. His polished shoes made no sound on the tile floor. "I'm the attending physician," he said. "And you? You've wandered too far." Behind him, the lights flickered and died. The hallway plunged into darkness. The whispers began again, louder now, rising into a terrible chorus. I spun toward room 307, but Ethan was gone. The bed was empty. Mrs. Lewis's heart monitor in room 304 was flatlining. "What is happening?" I whispered. The man's footsteps echoed behind me. I ran toward the elevator, but when I reached it, the doors slammed shut. "You can't leave," the man's voice echoed. I turned toward the stairwell. I pushed through the door and sprinted down the steps. My headlamp beam bobbed wildly across the stained concrete walls. I reached the bottom floor and burst through the exit door, only to find myself standing in the same hallway on the third floor. "No," I gasped. I turned and saw the man standing at the end of the hallway. "You don't understand," he said, stepping toward me. "You're part of it now." I stumbled backward and crashed into a supply closet door. I threw it open and shut it behind me, locking it. Darkness surrounded me. My breathing was ragged. Click, 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 footsteps. "I know you're in there," the man's voice whispered from the other side of the door. I backed into the shelves, knocking over boxes of gloves and supplies. I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. Then I heard Ethan's voice. "He's waking up." Suddenly, the lights in the closet exploded. Shards of glass showered down, and the door handle began to turn. The whispering rose into a deafening scream as the door opened. The door burst open, and I screamed. My back hit the supply shelves as the pale figure in the doctor's coat stepped into the closet. His face was inches from mine, too close, and his cold, black eyes stared through me like I was nothing more than a specimen under glass. "You can't hide," he whispered. His breath smelled like rotting meat and chemicals. "You're already part of this." My hand shot out and grabbed a pair of scissors from the shelf. I swung them wildly, but they passed through him like smoke. The doctor smiled. "That's not going to work." Suddenly, the lights in the hall flickered back on. The man stepped backward, his form starting to blur and distort as the light grew brighter. I bolted out of the closet, racing down the hallway toward the stairwell. My heart was hammering so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. Not the screaming, not the whispers. The stairwell door flew open with a loud bang as I shoved through it, taking the steps 2 at a time. I reached the second floor and pushed through the exit door, and found myself back on the third floor. No, 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 no. The hallway was wrong now. The walls were warped and pulsing like they were breathing. The tiles beneath my feet were wet and sticky. I forced myself to look down and nearly threw up. The floor was covered in a slick, dark red substance. Blood. Down the hall, I saw room 304. Mrs. Lewis's heart monitor was still beeping, steadily, impossibly steady. A flatline rhythm, but the machine kept making noise. I stumbled toward the room. The lights buzzed and dimmed as I pushed open the door. Mrs. Lewis was sitting up in bed. Her head was bent at an unnatural angle, her mouth twisted into a horrible grin. Her milky white eyes stared at me. "You brought him back," she said in a soft, thin voice. "What are you talking about?" My voice shook. "You woke him up," she said, tilting her head further, the bones in her neck making a sickening pop. "You were never supposed to come here." Suddenly she lunged at me. Her thin, claw-like hands shot out and grabbed my wrist, her grip unnaturally strong. Her nails dug into my skin, drawing blood. I screamed and yanked free, stumbling back into the hall. The door slammed shut on its own, and I heard the sound of her laughing, a high, breathless giggle that made my skin crawl. I turned toward room 307. Ethan. If anyone knew what was happening, it was him. I ran down the hall, my shoes slipping on the blood-soaked floor. I shoved the door open, but the bed was empty. Ethan. From behind me, I heard a soft click, 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 the sound of polished shoes on tile. "He's not here," said a low voice. I spun around. The doctor stood in the doorway, his face half hidden in the shadows. His eyes gleamed. "You don't understand," he said. "You've opened the door." "What door?" I shouted. "What are you talking about?" The doctor stepped closer. His shadow stretched unnaturally across the floor, twisting and warping toward me. "Some places," he said, "are not meant to be disturbed." I backed away until my heel hit the edge of the bed. The doctor smiled. His teeth were unnaturally sharp. "You woke up something old," he whispered, "and now it's hungry." Suddenly the lights exploded in a shower of sparks. The room plunged into darkness. I heard the sound of footsteps, running. "Come on," Ethan's voice. A hand grabbed my arm. "Come on." I didn't hesitate. I ran with him down the hall. The lights were flickering wildly, casting twisted shadows across the walls. "What the hell is happening?" I shouted. Dot, dot. "It's him," Ethan said breathlessly as we raced toward the stairwell. "The doctor, he's not a person. He's something else." We burst through the stairwell door and started down. "I don't understand," I said between gasps. Dot. Ethan yanked me to a stop halfway down the stairs. His face was pale, his dark eyes wide. "He's not a ghost," Ethan said. "Not exactly. He's old. Something that's been in this hospital since the beginning. And now that the hollow ward is open again, he's free." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "No, it doesn't," Ethan replied. "But it's happening." A sudden loud crash from above made us both look up. The doctor was there, standing at the top of the stairs, his head tilted unnaturally to the side. His smile was so wide it split his face. "Running won't save you," he said. Dot, back. We ran. The stairs twisted and warped beneath our feet. We reached the bottom, but the door that should have led to the lobby was gone. Just a smooth, cold wall of white tile. "We're trapped," I said, my voice breaking. Ethan pressed his hands against the wall. "No," he whispered. "There has to be a way out." "I told you," the doctor's voice said from the top of the stairs. "You're part of this now." A low, rumbling sound filled the air. The tiles beneath our feet began to crack. From those cracks, dark tendrils. "What is that?" I shouted. Ethan pulled me toward the opposite wall. "We have to go down." "Down?" "The basement," Ethan said, his voice urgent. "There's nothing down there." "Yes," he said. "That's the point." He grabbed my hand and we ran down the last flight of stairs. The door to the basement was rusted and warped. Ethan kicked it open and we stumbled into the dark. The walls down here were unfinished concrete, slick with moisture. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping water. "Keep moving," Ethan said, dot, dot. I followed him down the corridor. The sound of the doctor's footsteps echoed behind us. Click, click, click. "You can't run," the doctor's voice whispered from the shadows. "You belong to me now." We reached the end of the corridor. There was a steel door ahead, old and rusted. A heavy chain was looped through the handles. "Help me," Ethan shouted, grabbing the chain. I pulled with him, my hands burning as the metal bit into my skin. Behind us, the darkness was moving. Tendrils of black smoke curled along the floor and ceiling. The doctor stepped out of the shadows, his form distorted and unnatural now. His limbs were too long, his face stretched into a terrible mockery of a human smile. "You can't leave," he whispered. "You're part of the ward now." The chain snapped. Ethan shoved open the door, and we fell through into a dark, empty room. The doctor's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Cold burned through my arm like acid. Ethan pulled me away, and I screamed as the doctor's hand slid down my arm, taking a piece of me with it. My skin was gray and cold where he'd touched me. The steel door slammed shut, dot, dot. We collapsed against the wall, gasping. What the hell was that?" I said. Ethan shook his head. "We have to destroy him," he said. "It's the only way." "Destroy him?" I said. "How the hell are we supposed to destroy that?" Ethan's eyes were wide and dark. "There's a reason the Hollow Ward was closed," he said. "They tried to lock him away." "How?" "I don't know," Ethan said, "but we're going to find out." Suddenly the door began to rattle. The doctor's low voice echoed from the other side. "You think you've escaped?" he said softly. "Oh, no, we're only just beginning." The steel door shook violently, the sound echoing through the dark basement. Bang, bang. The doctor's twisted voice seeped through the cracks in the door. "You can't hide from me," he whispered. "You don't belong out there anymore. You belong here with me." My arm still burned where he'd touched me. The skin was gray and numb, and it pulsed with a strange coldness that crept toward my shoulder. "We need to move," Ethan said, his voice sharp. I forced myself to stand, ignoring the deep ache in my legs. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light. The basement stretched out before us, a maze of concrete walls and rusted pipes. "We need to destroy him," I said. "But how the hell are we supposed to kill something that's not even alive?" "There's a reason the Hollow Ward was closed," Ethan said. "He was contained once. There has to be a way to do it again." A loud, scraping sound filled the air. My head whipped toward the source. "The archives?" Ethan said. "What?" "There's an old records room down here," Ethan explained. already moving toward a dark hallway. If there's anything left that explains how they trapped him, it's going to be there. I followed him, the cold in my arm growing worse with every step. The hallway was narrow, the pipes above us dripping steadily onto the floor. The air was so damp it felt like I was breathing in water. Ethan stopped at a heavy wooden door. The paint was peeling, and it had deep gouges in the surface. "Help me," he said. We both shoved against it. After a moment of resistance, the door creaked open, releasing a blast of cold, stale air. The room beyond was cluttered with old filing cabinets and stacks of yellowed papers. Dust floated in the air, making it hard to breathe. Ethan started tearing through the cabinets. "Look for anything about patient experiments," he said, "or the ward being shut down." I stumbled toward a rusted metal desk and opened the top drawer. Inside was a stack of patient files. I flipped through them, my fingers shaking. Patient number 302, severe schizophrenia, electroshock treatment. Patient number 217, insomnia, depression, lobotomy. Patient number 104, psychosis, restraint protocol. My stomach churned. This place wasn't just a hospital, it was a prison. "Found something," Ethan said. I turned. He held up a thin leather journal. The cover was stamped with a name, Dr. Richard Holloway. "The original head doctor," Ethan said. He flipped it open. Inside were faded handwritten entries. Ethan's eyes scanned the pages quickly. "Listen to this," he said. His voice was sharp with urgency. "We made a mistake. The patient in room 304, he's not human. He never was. The treatments didn't work because he wasn't sick. He was something else. We tried to isolate him, but the ward is feeding him now. The building itself is becoming part of him." We sealed the door, locked him inside the hollow ward. "But if it ever opens again, we won't be able to stop him." I felt sick. "Room 304, I whispered. "Mrs. Lewis's room." Ethan flipped further through the pages. "There's only one way to stop him." "What is it?" I asked. "Fire." My eyes widened. "Fire?" "It makes sense," Ethan said. "They didn't shut the hospital down because of bad press or poor treatment. They shut it down because they were trying to burn him out." "But they failed," I said. "Because they didn't finish the job," Ethan replied. A sudden loud crash from the hallway made us both jump. I turned toward the door and froze. The doctor was standing there, his smile stretched impossibly wide. His arms were too long now, the flesh hanging unnaturally from his bones. "I warned you," he whispered. I stumbled back. The papers in my hands scattered to the floor. "You can't stop me," the doctor said softly. "You've already let me out." Dark tendrils of smoke curled out from beneath his feet, crawling across the floor toward us. Ethan grabbed my hand. "Run." We bolted toward the back of the room, climbing over fallen filing cabinets and broken desks. The tendrils followed us, curling around Ethan's ankle. He stumbled, falling to the floor. "No." I grabbed his arm and yanked hard. The tendrils were dragging him backward, dark smoke curling around his legs. The doctor's smile widened. His teeth gleamed unnaturally white. "You can't take him," I snarled. I pulled Ethan free, and we stumbled toward the back wall. A small maintenance door was half buried beneath a pile of old chairs. Ethan shoved them aside and pulled the door open. We dove through, landing hard on the concrete floor beyond. Ethan slammed the door shut behind us, locking it with a rusted bolt. Panting, we looked around. We were in the boiler room. "I think we just found our solution," Ethan said. I followed his gaze. The room was filled with old gas lines and a massive furnace. Rusted pipes twisted along the ceiling like veins. "We're going to burn him out," Ethan said. I shook my head. "If we light this place up, we might not make it out." Ethan's face was pale and determined. "It's the only way," he said. I swallowed hard, then nodded. The floor above us creaked. The doctor's voice echoed through the pipes. "You're not leaving," he whispered. Ethan moved toward the furnace, wrenching open a rusted gas valve. A thin hiss filled the room as the air grew heavier. "Now," Ethan shouted. I grabbed a box of matches from a shelf and struck one. The tiny flame flickered and danced. "You'll burn with me," the doctor's voice hissed. The tendrils of smoke were already curling under the door. I looked at Ethan. His dark eyes were steady. "Do it," he said. I threw the match. Bah! There was a moment of absolute silence, and then the room exploded. Fire erupted along the pipes, climbing the walls. The ceiling cracked and groaned as the flames spread. The dark tendrils recoiled and screamed, twisting as the fire engulfed them. The doctor's voice howled through the air, an inhuman scream of rage and pain. "Go!" Ethan shouted, grabbing my hand. We ran toward the exit, smoke filling the air. The hallway beyond was already burning. We sprinted toward the stairwell, my lungs screaming for air. Behind us, the building groaned and shuddered. The fire was spreading too fast. We burst into the lobby. The glass doors were cracked from the heat, but they held. "Almost there," Ethan yelled. Suddenly, the doctor's shape emerged from the fire. His face was melting, his body blackened and burned, but he was still moving. "You can't kill me," he hissed. I grabbed a metal chair and hurled it at the glass door. It shattered. Ethan and I dove through the opening, just as the ceiling collapsed behind us. We hit the cold pavement outside, gasping. Flames erupted from the windows of the hollow ward, black smoke curling into the night sky. The doctor's face flickered in the fire for one last moment, then vanished. We lay there, breathing hard as the fire roared. After a moment, Ethan turned toward me. "You okay?" "No," I said. "You?" "Not even close." We both started laughing. Hysterical, exhausted laughter. In the distance, I heard the sound of sirens. "I think it's over," I said. Ethan's eyes were dark. "I hope so," he said. As the fire consumed the hollow ward, I couldn't help but wonder, had we destroyed him, or had we simply set him free? The Lost Ship. I've been on salvage missions for 10 years now, but I've never seen anything like this. It started with a distress signal, a weak, pulsing transmission picked up by the Coast Guard, an old maritime emergency code that hadn't been used in over 50 years. The source? Somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, far beyond the usual shipping routes. The ship's registry identified it as the Calliope, a cargo vessel that had gone missing in 1972. Its entire crew had vanished without a trace. My team was called in to investigate standard protocol. We'd salvaged sunken tankers, oil rigs, even crashed military submarines before. Haunted ships were just stories, sailors' superstitions, right? There were 5 of us on board the Corvus, our salvage ship. Captain Harris, the hard-ass leader who never let emotion cloud his judgment. Nick, our engineer and walking encyclopedia of naval history. Jade, the medic and Harris's closest confidant. Mark, our quiet but skilled sonar operator. And me, Olivia, lead recovery diver. It took 2 days of rough sailing to reach the coordinates. When the radar first picked it up, we thought it was a mistake. A ship shouldn't have been there, not that far from any trade routes. Got a visual, Mark called from the monitor. We crowded around the screen, and there it was, the Calliope. It drifted silently in the water, partially shrouded in fog, the moonlight casting long shadows across its rusted hull. The ship was massive, much larger than we expected. The exterior was corroded, covered in patches of algae and barnacles. Yet it didn't look like it had been sinking. It was intact. Captain Harris narrowed his eyes. It should have gone down decades ago, he muttered, ... I suited up for the dive with Nick while Harris stayed on the bridge to monitor us. As the dinghy approached the side of the ship, I could feel the temperature drop. The air around the Calliope was cold. Not normal cold, a sharp, unnatural chill that made my breath fog in the night air. Nick tied the dinghy to a corroded ladder. I went up first, my gloved hands scraping against the rusted metal as I climbed. My flashlight beam flicked across the deck, revealing chipped paint, shattered glass, and old lifeboats that were still intact but hanging loose from their hooks. "This is seriously messed up," Nick said as he pulled himself over the railing. We made our way toward the bridge. The silence was oppressive. No creaking metal, no echo of waves against the hull, just our breathing. Inside the bridge, the controls were intact, but covered in a thick layer of grime. Mold and algae grew in patches across the walls. A logbook sat open on the captain's table. I picked it up and dusted off the cover. "What does it say?" Nick asked. I squinted at the brittle pages, the ink barely legible. Final entry dated November 3rd, 1972. Crew distressed. Strange noises below deck. Navigational equipment failing. Unseen figure spotted near the engine room. Emergency signal set. If this reaches anyone, stay away. Nick let out a slow breath. Yeah, that's comforting. A loud clang echoed from the corridor behind us. We both jumped. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Nick pulled out his flashlight. "Maybe something's loose." I shined my beam down the hall. Nothing, just rows of empty doors and peeling paint. We split up to investigate. I checked the rooms one by one, finding only signs of abandonment. Old uniforms, corroded medical equipment, empty bunks. That's when I heard it. A faint sound beneath my feet. Tapping. A steady, rhythmic tapping. "Nick?" I called out. "Over here." His voice echoed from the opposite side of the hallway. I followed the sound of his lights, but then the tapping grew louder. It was coming from beneath the floor. Bang, 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 bang. The metal beneath my feet bulged. What the hell? Suddenly the floor buckled beneath me. My leg slipped through the rusted metal, and my knee hit something hard below. I screamed, pain shooting through my leg. "Olivia!" Nick's hands were under my arms, hauling me up. I coughed, clutching my leg. I'm fine. Nick shone his light through the hole where I'd fallen, and we both saw it. A hand. Thin, gray, clawed fingers were pressed against the underside of the metal, and then tap. Tap, tap, dot, dot. The fingers twitched. "Get up," Nick shouted. We ran back toward the deck. The ship suddenly felt alive. The air was heavier, and I swear the walls were closing in. Captain Harris's voice crackled over the radio. "Olivia, Nick, report. We need to get off this ship," I screamed. We reached the deck, but the dinghy was gone. What the neck spun around. Where is it? The rope's cut. Panic settled in. We were stranded. We turned toward the side of the ship and saw Jade standing at the railing. "Jade!" Nick yelled. She didn't answer. She just stood there, facing the water. Nick ran toward her. "Hey, what the hell are you?" Jade turned. Her eyes were black. She smiled. Then she stepped backward and disappeared over the side. "No!" Nick lunged forward, but I held him back. A low, vibrating hum began resonating through the ship, deep and guttural. From below deck, footsteps began echoing, too many for just a few people. A deep voice cut through the noise, hollow and unnatural. "You came for us. Now you belong to us." Nick and I backed toward the edge of the ship. I could feel the hum vibrating through the metal beneath my feet. Then the fog parted, and I saw them, figures rising out of the water, pale gray skin, sunken eyes, and black mouths stretched too wide. They were climbing up the side of the ship. Nick's hand closed around my arm. "What do we do?" "We fight," I said, my heart hammering. The first pair of hands gripped the railing. Then they climbed on board, and we realized the Calliope hadn't been abandoned. It had just been waiting. Nick and I stood frozen as the creatures hauled themselves over the side of the ship. Their gray, bloated skin glistened in the moonlight. Long, clawed fingers dragging across the corroded metal of the deck. Their eyes, hollow and sunken, glowed faintly like dying embers, and their mouths stretched too wide, black voids where teeth should have been. Nick tightened his grip on my arm. "What the hell are those things?" I couldn't answer because part of me already knew. Jade had vanished over the side, but now I saw her again, standing at the far end of the deck. Water dripped from her hair and uniform and her eyes. Her eyes were still black. "Jade?" Nick whispered. She smiled, wide and unnatural, then began walking toward us, her bare feet slapping weightily against the deck. Behind her, the other figures followed, dragging themselves upright with jerky, broken movements. Some wore tattered clothes, remnants of crew uniforms. Others were nearly naked, their bodies scarred and covered in dark lesions. "Back up," I said, pulling Nick toward the edge of the ship. "They're cutting us off," he hissed. He was right. The creatures were spreading out, moving to surround us. "We can't fight them all," I said. Nick's eyes darted toward the side of the ship. "We have to jump." Into the water? I glanced over the edge. The waves beneath us churned unnaturally, black and restless. What other choice do we have? A long, clawed hand shot toward Nick's ankle. I swung the crowbar from my tool belt. It connected with a sickening crack. The creature's arm bent backward at an impossible angle, but it didn't scream. It didn't even flinch. It just stared at me, its black eyes glittering like oil beneath the moonlight. Nick grabbed my hand. "Jump." We climbed the railing and hurled ourselves over the side. The water was freezing. The shock of it nearly stopped my heart. We surfaced, gasping, and I instinctively reached for Nick. His hand found mine, but the current was strong. dragging us toward the hull of the ship. I glanced up and saw the creatures leaning over the railing, watching us. Their mouths stretched open, and then they began screaming. The sound was deafening, an unearthly, wailing chorus that reverberated through the water and shook my skull. My vision blurred from the pressure. "They're going to pull us under," Nick shouted. I kicked toward the side of the ship, searching for the rope ladder we'd climbed earlier, but it was gone. Cut. Olivia. Nick's hand slipped from mine. I turned and saw a pair of gray, clawed hands closing around his ankle. "No!" Nick thrashed, his face wild with panic as he was yanked beneath the surface. Without thinking, I dove down after him. Beneath the surface, the water was unnaturally dark. I strained to see him, and then I spotted him, just a few feet below. A creature had him, its long fingers curled around his ankle, dragging him down. Nick was struggling, kicking, but the creature's grip was unyielding. I swam harder, heart hammering, and reached toward him. My fingers brushed his. A second pair of hands closed around my waist and yanked me backward. I screamed, bubbles escaping from my mouth as I was dragged deeper. I fought against the iron grip, kicking wildly. My flashlight, still strapped to my wrist, cut a pale beam through the dark water, and that's when I saw it. Dozens of them, floating in the depths below. Hundreds of gray figures, their bodies drifting lazily in the dark water. Their faces were blank, but their black eyes tracked my every movement. Nick twisted in the creature's grip, kicking hard enough to dislodge it. His hand shot toward me. I grabbed it, and together we propelled upward. The surface exploded around us as we broke through. I coughed and gasped for breath, clutching Nick's arm as he choked out seawater. Above us, the creatures were still screaming. We swam toward the rear of the ship, and that's when we saw the lifeboat. It was still attached, swaying precariously from the davits. Nick pointed toward it. "There, we can climb it." We reached the rope ladder beneath the lifeboat. Nick hoisted himself up first, then reached down to help me. As I climbed over the edge of the lifeboat, a sharp sound filled the air. A long metallic creak from somewhere deep in the hull. The ship was sinking. I could feel the vibration through the floor of the lifeboat, a low, resonating groan like metal under immense pressure. "That's not normal," Nick said. I scanned the deck. Jade was still there, her face pale beneath the moonlight. But her eyes were different now, and she was smiling. "Olivia." Nick's voice was shaking. Jade raised her hand slowly, and then she pointed downward. I followed her gaze toward the water beneath us. Shapes were moving beneath the surface, dark shapes, massive shapes. Then the lifeboat started to sink. "Get out," Nick shouted. I scrambled toward the edge, but the rope was already being pulled under. A pale hand shot out of the water and gripped the side of the lifeboat. Then another, and another. Jesus Christ. The hands began dragging the lifeboat down. The water was up to my knees, then my waist. Nick grabbed me, hauling me toward the edge. "Jump." I hesitated, and that's when the first face rose from the water. It was a woman, her features pale and swollen, her hair floating like seaweed around her face. Her mouth stretched wide as her black eyes locked on me. "Join us," she whispered. Nick shoved me over the side. I hit the water hard, struggling to the surface as Nick followed. The lifeboat disappeared beneath the waves, swallowed whole. I swam toward the ship. We have to get back on board. Nick hesitated. Are you crazy? We don't have a choice. We reached a dangling mooring line and climbed, hand over hand, back onto the deck. The creatures were gone. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the horizon. Nick leaned against the railing, his breath ragged. What now? Roar. My eyes drifted toward the entrance to the lower decks. The metal hatch was still ajar. I think. My pulse hammered in my ears. I think the ship is sinking because of them. Nick frowned. So what do? We find out why it's still afloat. You mean? I think whatever's keeping this ship above water is down there. Nick's eyes darkened. You want to go deeper? If we don't, I said, we're not getting off this ship. Nick's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly. We picked up the crowbars from the deck and made our way toward the entrance. Before I stepped through, I looked back toward the fog-shrouded ocean. I could still see Jade standing at the edge of the ship, her hands resting on the railing, her lips parted. Bye. Her mouth didn't move, but I heard her voice in my head. Come down below, Olivia. We've been waiting for you. Nick and I descended the metal staircase into the heart of the ship. My breath echoed in the narrow steel corridor, each step down bringing with it a growing sense of pressure, like the weight of the entire ocean was bearing down on us. Nick walked ahead of me, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. His knuckles were white from how hard he was gripping it. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the fear he was trying to suppress. The deeper we went, the colder the air became. My breath came out in visible puffs, and moisture dripped down the metal walls, forming dark, rusted streaks. The air reeked of salt and rot. I don't like this, Nick muttered, ... I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind kept replaying what Jade had said. Come down below. The lower levels of the ship were nearly pitch black. The emergency lights along the ceiling flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. ... We passed a series of open doors. Inside each one were empty bunks, personal belongings still strewn across the floor, as though the crew had left in a hurry. And the further we went, the worse the damage became. Furniture lay overturned. Deep gouges marred the metal walls, long, jagged scratches. Jesus, Nick whispered. He knelt down, shining his flashlight over one of the walls. What the hell made these? I stepped closer. The scratch marks were deep, too deep to have been made by any tool or weapon I knew of. That's not the worst part, Nick said. ... I followed his gaze to the floor. There, beneath the scratches, was something I hadn't seen before. A dark, crusted substance. Blood. I think the crew fought back, Nick said. His voice was low, steady, but beneath it I could hear the fear. And they lost, I said. A noise came from up ahead. A faint tapping sound. Nick and I froze. The sound was slow and deliberate, like someone knocking on a hollow door. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the engine room. Nick raised his crowbar. Do we go in? We don't have a choice. We pushed through the heavy steel door. The engine room was massive. Pipes and machinery stretched up into the shadows above us, illuminated only by the dim emergency lights. A low hum filled the air, the sound of the ship's dying heartbeat. There's no way this ship is still operational, Nick whispered. How was it still afloat? I didn't know, but I was beginning to suspect that something was keeping it afloat, something not mechanical. A sudden chill swept through the room, and then the noise came again, not tapping this time. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Nick, bot. A figure stepped out from behind the machinery. It was Jade. Her hospital uniform was soaked with seawater, her skin pallid and glistening, her black eyes locked on mine. "Olivia," she whispered, "come closer." My heart pounded. I took a step back, but Nick didn't move. "Nick? Nick?" I grabbed his arm. He was staring at her, his mouth slightly open, eyes distant. "Nick," I shouted. But Jade was smiling now. "He's already heard the call," she whispered. Just like I did, Nick's hand loosened around the crowbar. "Nick!" I yanked him backward, hard. His eyes fluttered, confusion crossing his face. "What?" Jade's smile widened unnaturally. "Don't fight it, Olivia. You don't have to run anymore." "Stay back," I shouted. Jade tilted her head. "But why would you want to leave? You belong here now." "Nick, Nick." The emergency lights flickered violently, and then the shadows came to life. Figures emerged from the darkness. The crew, the men we'd seen before. Their faces were bloated and pale, their eyes black and shining like oil. They moved with unnatural grace, slipping between the pipes and machinery. "We've been waiting for you," Jade whispered. Nick's grip tightened on my arm. "We need to get out of here," he said. But the crew were closing in from all sides. There was no way out. Jade stepped forward, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the metal floor. "You could stay with us forever," she said softly. "No more fear, no more pain." Behind her, a massive shape shifted in the shadows. It was huge, dark, barely human. A figure with too many limbs, its massive body unfurling from the machinery. Glowing white eyes opened in the dark. "What the hell is that?" Nick breathed. Jade's head slowly turned toward the creature. "Our captain," she whispered. "He's been waiting for you too." The thing's eyes pulsed like heartbeats, and then it moved. Tentacles shot toward us. Nick and I dove aside as the steel pipes buckled and twisted under the impact. "Run!" We sprinted toward the exit, but the crew were waiting there. A pair of cold hands grabbed my arm. I screamed, wrenching free. Nick swung the crowbar, cracking it across one of their skulls, but the figure barely reacted. "We can't fight them," he shouted. "Then what do we do?" I saw it then, a rusted wheel on the wall near the back of the engine room. It was marked Floodgate Release. "We have to sink the ship." Nick's eyes widened. "Are you insane?" "If we don't stop this, they'll pull us under." The massive creature was moving now, unfurling itself from the machinery, its limbs stretching unnaturally across the ceiling. Nick grabbed the wheel. This better work. He turned it. A low groan echoed through the ship as the floodgates released. Water surged through the lower corridors. The crew stumbled backward as the tide filled the room. Jade screamed, a high, unearthly sound. Her body contorted, her limbs snapping unnaturally as the water swallowed her whole dot. Nick grabbed my hand. "Come on." We climbed the ladder toward the deck as the water rose behind us. The creature's massive limbs thrashed through the machinery, but it was too late. The ship was dying. We burst onto the deck. The lifeboat had resurfaced. half submerged but still intact. We climbed aboard as the ship groaned beneath us. The deck tilted sharply, then collapsed inward. Metal screamed as the hull tore open. The ship slipped beneath the waves. Jade's face was the last thing I saw, her black eyes staring up from beneath the water. Her lips moved soundlessly. "We'll find you." Then the ocean swallowed her whole. Nick and I floated for hours. The sun rose, cutting through the fog, and eventually we saw a ship on the horizon, ... The Coast Guard. They pulled us from the water, wrapping us in blankets. When the officer asked what happened, I didn't know what to say. "A storm," I whispered. "We got caught in a storm." Nick looked at me, but he didn't contradict me. I couldn't tell them the truth, because I knew, even though we'd escaped that ship, we weren't safe. Even now, sometimes I hear the sound of the ocean calling to me ... And when I close my eyes at night, I see Jade's face beneath the water, and those black eyes staring back at me, because I know the truth. That ship didn't sink. It's still out there, waiting for its next crew.